Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome to Irish Breakdown. My name is Vince D'Addario. That man over there is Brian Driscoll, and it is a Friday free-for-all mailbag. And frankly, it's the best day of the week. I'm not sure if anybody else agrees with that, but they should if they don't.
Especially now, Vince, because it's not only Friday, but it's your last day of school.
Last day of school. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, pretty fired up about that.
I can tell.
This background right here, you're not going to see it for quite some time. So
no, we can't wait to get that fluorescent green in the background moving forward, baby.
Right. And you never know. I might be doing shows from campus. I might, you just never know what's going to happen. So very excited about the next few weeks. That is for darn sure. But today is Friday. It's the free-for-all mailbag. You guys drive the show. So get your questions in, and we will do our best to get through as many as humanly possible.
And boy, are there a lot.
There always are, and we all know who starts things off. And it's our guy, John A1. He starts us off with a happy Friday, IB.
Right, always does.
And
always does.
Got to throw that up there. But, of course, he's got some questions. His first one says, which player on the 22 roster will have the most all-purpose yards? So we're talking receiving, rushing, return yards.
I always get all-purpose confused with total offense.
Ooh.
Always. Yeah. Ooh. So I'm go ahead, Vince. You want to go ahead and
so I guess we got to figure out what the criteria is.
It's rush. Is it so rushing, receiving, returns? Right.
What we're going to go with.
Yeah, I think that's. I believe it's total offense that includes passing.
Oh yeah.
That's how I always get. Yeah. It's so total offense is rush yards and pass yards. Doesn't include receiving, which I don't understand why that's a thing for anyone other than quarterbacks.
Right.
But so all purpose is rushing, receiving, and returns, and I think that makes the answer a lot easier.
It's Chris Tyree for me.
Right.
I mean, because he's going to rack up as a kick returner. You automatically are going to rack up a bunch of yards as long as you're not back there fair catching everything, which I hope is not the case this year.
But even then, he's still. I mean, even with all the
he's just going to have a lot of opportunities
last year, right? I mean, he still had 347 kick return yards last year.
There you go.
I mean, so even banged up and
right. Because look, Michael Mayer's going to have a bunch of receiving yards. We know that he's not going to have any yards on the ground, or he probably shouldn't have too many. The running backs are going to have some receiving yards, obviously, but then that's Chris Tyree. He's going to have yards out of the backfield. He's going to have rushing yards, and he's going to have return yards.
Yeah, Vince, even when he was banged up and injured last year, didn't play all games. He was barely played in some others. He still had 827 total yards last year, which was fourth on the team. So, I mean, he's still – and that was behind Mayer, Austin, and Kyron Williams. So he's still even last year was above pace. So barring injury, he is going to –
yes. I don't think it's going to be called that close, to be honest with you.
And he could be their number 2 or 3 leading rusher, and it's still be the case because he's going to have receiving yards.
Unless they take him off the return game, which I don't see.
Right.
I mean,
barring it. But here's the thing: the only way I think they take him off the return game is if he's the lead back.
Yeah, because you want to risk injury that way.
Right, and if he's the lead back, then he's still getting all his yards rushing and receiving.
Right.
So I think either way, it's going to be that. That's going to be the case.
I like it. Next one in the holster from John. He says,
actually, you know what? Let's have a little fun with that one since it is kind of easy. Let's say something happens that Chris Tyree is not available. Or we could just say, okay, who's number 2? I think that would be the more interesting.
That's where it gets a little bit deeper because it depends on who his replacement's going to be in the return game, number 1. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, let's just say who's going to be number 2. Let's just say we don't wish ill will on somebody. Let's just say he's number 1.
I see what you're saying.
I think then say who is going to be number 2. I think that could be a really interesting, a more interesting conversation simply because of the kick return nature of what he does. And I would argue right now, barring them landing the kid from Iowa, I think that the punt returner is probably going to be Brandon Joseph, which takes a little bit off of the plate there. So that makes it a little bit interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, because if Brandon Joseph's returning punts, he takes that little piece out of the equation because he's not going to have offensive all-purpose yards, right? So now I think you're going to be talking about a running back because I think they're going to get the most opportunities.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? From rushing and receiving. So now who's that running back going to be? Is it going to be Logan Diggs? Is he going to be ready for the season with his?
So you're basically going with whoever the number 2 back is.
I do. Yeah. Right? I think that's where I would have.
I'm going Lorenzo Styles. I think
Okay.
it'll actually be a receiver. It'll be either Lorenzo or Braden Lindsey.
Okay.
Because I think that if Braden's healthy, my hope is that we're going to see him used a lot more like we saw him used in 2019, where he had a 61-yard touchdown on a jet. I mean, he had almost as many rushing yards in 2019 as he had receiving yards,
Sure.
jet sweeps and, reverses and stuff like that. So I could see him, or if they decide to use Lorenzo in that role, I could see Lorenzo doing that as well. Because Lorenzo, I mean, he showed last year he had was it USC or North Carolina, one of those two games where he had a long run on it ended up only being technically it only counted as 31 yards because it was over 50, but there was a downfield hold that brought it back from the spot. It's a spot foul. So
yeah,
it ended up still being officially like a 30-something yard run. But I think it'd be one of those two. Plus, I could see Lorenzo occasionally getting some punt return opportunities. Especially if they don't land Charlie Jones, I could definitely see that being the case. No
okay.
question.
All right. I like where your head's at there. Okay.
Yeah. The reason I didn't go back, Vince, is because I think even if Logan Diggs is healthy, I think the backs are going to sort of
rotate, more of a rotation there. I see what you're saying. Because there's so much talent in the backfield. You've got to get those guys on the field. I get where you're coming from.
I think you answered your own question. Who's going to be the number 2 guy? Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Right.
They're all going to play.
Good point. All right. John says, what player on the Notre Dame roster has the best yards after catch talent?
I still think that's Braden. I mean, he's still the guy that if he gets a crease, he's gone. I mean, he's the one that's shown it. I think the other option would be yards after the catch.
Somebody who can
Lorenzo
who can
would be the other one.
Lorenzo would be my first one.
Lorenzo, and to me, it's Lorenzo and Braden are the two. Okay. Yeah, I still think Braden. Again, part of that's because we've seen him do it. Right. And if he's healthy and he's the guy that we think he's going to do,
sure.
Braden really showed me something in the spring game because he on that play where he got the jet sweep and he just lowered his shoulder and ran a guy over. It showed me that his mindset has truly changed.
Practices differently than I've ever seen him practice before.
Yeah, I think he's locked in.
It's hard to kind of put your finger on why I say that. I just see him as more dialed in than he's ever been before. I see him more taking coaching than he ever did before. I mean, he was dialed into Coach Stuckey during practice. And I know the clips that I sent you, bear that out, but it was a different dude, really. So I like where you're at there too. We got a super chat here from Bayside Tiger 6. I do love that name. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you to any vets out there and their families. 1 to 10 scale. How much does a number 1 ranking so far and each additional commit move the uncommitted?
I think quite a bit. I mean, look, we've used this expression before here at Irish Breakdown, not use the expression, but we've made the point that, look, in football especially, best players want to play with the other best players. So you say, okay, you look at where they are now. They have the number 1 ranked class. If you look at rivals, all 13 of their commits are 4-star kids or better. I mean, they've got more top 100 commits right now than anybody else. It's not just, they're not number 1 like Texas Tech is number 2, right?
20
they get 20 kids.
Yeah.
I mean, the quality of what Notre Dame has done so far has been exceptional. I mean, it's top 50 players. It's top
they have 12
guys.
Commits, and they're ranked higher,
13 now,
and higher than a team that has 20. And
right,
it's a points-based system. People need to understand that too.
Right, but they're number 1 for everybody, and they're 50 points ahead. The next best team at number 3 is Penn State. They have 12. So Penn State, use Rivals as an example because Rivals is just a pure rankings-based, points-based system. Notre Dame is number 1 at 13. They have 1 5-star and 12 4-stars. Texas Tech is next at 20. Notre Dame has 1,802 points. Texas Tech is next with 1,752. They have 6 4-stars and 14 3-stars. The number 3 team is Penn State. They have 1,219 points. They have 12 commits. They have 1 less commitment than Notre Dame, but they are almost 600 points behind Notre Dame. And they're Notre Dame's average star ranking is over a 4.0. It's 4.1. Penn State's at 3.4. Ohio State is next at number 4 with 10 commits. And they are at 1,196 points. So they're over 600 points behind. So Notre Dame is way ahead. I mean, for Ohio State to be able to catch Notre Dame, I mean, they're going to have to get like 3 like truly elite players. Like if they landed the number 1 player in the country, that's 250 points. If they landed the number 2 player in the country, that's 233 points. So, and then they'd have to land the number 1, 2, and 3 players in the country right now to pass Notre Dame with the same number of commitments.
Right.
It's not happening.
Right.
Because they're not going to get the 1, 2, or 3 number player in the country.
Right.
So, I mean, they're just so far ahead. So far ahead. Georgia's another example. Georgia's only got 8 commitments, but Georgia's got 5 4-stars and 3 3-stars. You know, their average star ranking is 3.63. Notre Dame is at 4.08. So it's not just the numbers, it's the quality.
Right.
And kids see that. And you know, the more you get top players, the more others want to come. The other part of it too is does it move the uncommitted? It moves the uncommitted from this standpoint as well, Vince. And that is, okay, we've now landed a second receiver or a third offensive lineman or whatever the case may be. If you want to be part of this thing, you know, we need to know now. We can't let this thing play out till December. We've got to make sure we get our numbers. So if you don't do, you know, if you're not willing to jump on board right now, then we need to know. So it helps them do that as well. So on top of, you know, what's the old expression, you know, savages want to play with other savages is what kids said like 5-6 years ago. I don't know. That's probably not so thing. Things go out in and out so quickly nowadays. But like when we were kids, like, you know, a phrase would be kind of a thing until we were grown, you know, like now it's like every year we don't say that. Well, really? Well, you don't? No, that was so last semester. You know,
welcome to being a parent of a teenager. Believe me, I can't keep it straight.
It's pass. But so that's kind of that's how I see it, Vince, is it's that combination of 2 things. Like, hey, we don't have as much room at the end as we had before. So if you really want to be part of this, you need to jump on board. And I think that helps. And it helps maybe the kids who might otherwise be wavering. Like, why would you want to go to Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State when we're bringing in better players than they are?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that helps too, that it often isn't discussed as much, is the fact that Notre Dame landed the number 6 class in the country last year. It's not like they're joining a roster with a bunch of nobodies that they've got to carry the team. I mean, they're like, hey, look, we're showing up from there's some dudes last year. And then you look at the fact that Notre Dame had so many freshmen playing on an 11-2 team. These kids are also going to look at the current roster and be like, yeah, we're set for something special. And you hear the kids saying that because the recruits are parroting the exact same thing as what the current players are parroting, which is we're here to win a national championship. Mm-hmm. They're selling the heck out of that right now. And it's working. That's pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Benjamin, I believe, has our next question in the queue. Benjamin says, who are your top 3 playmakers on offense and defense this season for the Irish? And I did grab my pen while you were talking, and I cheated.
I knew the next question was going to be interesting because when Vince grabbed his pen, I was like, okay, here we go. Okay.
I had to be ready.
Buckle up. What's coming next?
Yeah.
You want you want to, since you've already started to put some thought into this, Vince, you want to go ahead and kick it off? And
so
we'll go offensively first, then we'll go defense.
Yeah.
And
offensively, I think we're all gonna. Well, it doesn't matter if they start or not. Frankly, we're just talking about playmakers. And for me, the 3 playmakers for me, the ones I'm excited about making plays with the ball in their hands: Tyler Buckner, Chris Tyree, and Lorenzo Styles. Those are my 3. And like my 3B. Would be Braden Lindsey. Like he belongs in that group, but you said 3. So he's on the outside looking in for me, but I could easily replace him up there with somebody. But those are mine.
I agree with number 1. Tyler Buckner's in my list. Lorenzo Styles is in my list, and my 3rd is Michael Mayer. I know he's a tight end, but he's still a playmaker. And plays aren't always just like, to me, because it's also depends how do you define a playmaker. You define a guy that's going to hit an 80-yard home run. Well, that's not Michael Mayer, right? But when I look at Michael Mayer, I see a guy that's going to be making a ton of plays on 3rd down. He can make people miss. He's going to make some ridiculous catches this year, which we saw glimpses of last year. I think he's their best player. And, unless your best player is a guard or a tackle or something like that, I got to put your best player in that top 3. So I understand why you didn't, because I think you define it a little bit differently than I do, which is kind of what makes it fun.
Yeah.
But for me, it's Mayer's number 1, and then it's Buckner, then it's Styles.
Okay.
But you could, like, to your point though, you could easily put Chris Tyree in there. You could easily put Braden Lindsay in there. Like, that's the thing that I like about this football team is there are playmakers on this team. There is speed on this team. Like, I know we're worried about injuries. And look, injuries with Chris Tyree is a legitimate thing. He was banged up most of last year. He missed most of the spring. I get it. It's fair. Injuries are concerned with Braden Lindsay. I get it. Joe Wilkins, Avery Davis, both coming off major injuries. Logan Diggs coming off a major injury. That's a valid concern about this football team is depth and health.
Yep.
But if they are somewhat healthy and they're going to get Tobias Merriweather on campus here soon. Eli Raritan and Holden Stace are going to be showing up soon. Kane Barong is coming back from an injury. So they're going to be some reinforcement showing up here this fall too, compared to what they had in the spring. And we forget sometimes, their most experienced proven receiver didn't practice this spring, for some of the concerns about the offense. So this team has talent. It has athletes. Can they stay healthy? And can guys get the most out of their games? Those are the more
coaches get the most out of the players. Like
that's a good point.
I think that's a valid. Now I think
until we see it.
Yeah, exactly. Is the scheme going to get all those guys involved? Because there's been talent on this team in the past, and they haven't gotten them the ball in the right ways. And
I think this staff will get there.
Yes,
but they've got to show it.
Absolutely.
That's the key. If we were just going to assume it's going to happen, then that makes us fanboys, and that's not us. We can say what we think is going to happen, but then still say, "But now you got to show me, right?" And now you got to prove it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of talent on. I mean, the fact that I didn't put Chris Tyree or Braden Lindsay in my top 3, and you didn't bat an eye, like, dude, you are nuts not having Chris Tyree in there. It's just exactly the point of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and as soon as I'm like Michael Mayer, and you forgot about Michael Mayer, it seemed like, oh yeah, but that says a lot about because your first thought is speed.
Yes.
And so you go to Tyree and Styles and Lindsay and Buckner, and that's your first thought. And then my first thought is different.
Making plays, get first downs.
And it's Mayer. It's right. Yeah. It's what's exciting about this team. What about defense, Vince? I think this one will be a little bit I think this one will be a little bit harder.
This one is harder for me because I think you could go a lot of different directions with quote unquote playmakers. And
I think the number 1 is easy, though. I think we can both agree on that. It's the dude that led the nation in forced fumbles and was top 10 in sacks.
I have Foskey as my number 1.
Can we at least agree on that? He's 1, and then
I have
figure out 2 and 3.
Okay. I have Joseph as my number 2.
Okay.
I think that he's going to be making a ton of plays. I love watching him in the limited amount of time we got to watch practice. I think he's going to make a lot of plays. And now you're telling me he's going to be the punt returner too, playmaker.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
So
I didn't think about the punt return aspect. Okay.
Yeah. So I think Joseph is going to be a dude this year, and I think he's going to be fun to watch. And then, I mean, come on, how could I not have Cam Hart on my list? I am the president.
We'll explain why he shouldn't be on your list, but go ahead.
I'm putting him on my list because now I think they're going to go away from him. I don't know if he's going to get a ton of opportunities.
There you go.
Didn't mean to steal your thunder on that one.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. I love it.
But I just think if there's going to be quarterbacks out there going to be like, I'm going after him. I'm going after 5, and he's going to make them pay for it, and he's going to make plays. And so even if he doesn't get a ton of opportunities, I think the opportunities that he gets, he's going to make those plays. So I got to have Cam Hart on my list. Now, there's 3 or 4 other guys that I think you could easily have on this list because I think the defense is absolutely stacked with playmakers. So I'll let you give your list.
My number 2 is Marist.
Yeah.
And again, this is projecting a little bit, right? I'm projecting forward what I think is going to happen. I think number 2 for me is Marist. I think he's going to be a big-time playmaker for this football team. I do not have Cam Hart on my list. I'm not even going to think twice about putting Cam Hart on my list because the reason is again, it's not the 3 best players. If it was the 3 best players, my list would be completely different.
Interesting.
It would be the 3 playmakers because I don't count locking a dude down as being a playmaker. It makes you a great player. A playmaker is more like Julian Love, who plays off-man coverage and just breaks in the ball all game and breaks up a bunch of passes, picks some off, and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't think Cam Hart's going to have anywhere close to the production that Julian Love had because they're going to use him so much differently. Right. And he's a different type of player. It's going to be more about, you're like, did Cam Hart play today? Like, oh, yeah, he did. Because you just don't see him because they just avoid him, right? Like, that is dominance, but that's not what I view as the premise of the question. The premise is playmakers. So Marist is number 2. And honestly, Vince, I can't decide between who I want my number 3 to be. It's either going to be Brandon Joseph, and the punt return aspect was really interesting. I didn't think about that. And if he ends up returning punts, then I'm going to put him in there just because that's considered being a playmaker, right? And so at that point in time, Vince, my initial thought was Jason Adamiola, because I think Jason's going to make a ton of plays this year.
I had him on my,
but if we're going to go just defense, I'm probably going to go Jason. If you add in the special teams aspect, because then again, you start thinking about, okay, well, Brandon Joseph won't just be making plays in punt return. He'll probably be making plays in kick coverage, punt coverage, some other areas, which only adds to it. Where Jason's just a defensive player, then that's where I would lean towards Brandon. But if we're just talking defense, my first thought was Jason. But I think the angle you took on it is, look, plays are plays, right? Whether they're on defense or special teams. I really like the point you made there, Vincent. So I'm going to then change mine and put Brandon Joseph on there if he's the main punt returner.
Right. That's
if
a big
if. Not the main punt returner, then I'm going back to Jason Adamiola.
Yeah.
Right?
I see that.
So, but that's a really, really good point, Vince. Really, really well done. You look at you over there, you want to be like, yeah, so bad. Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
We got another super chat here from Shelton Hager, 91. Thank you so much. If you could have 2 hours to talk to your top 3 college coaches of all time, dead or alive, who would it be and why? Also, who's your top 3 overrated coaches of all time?
We're going to do a show about this summer in regards to underrated, overrated. So I look forward to having that conversation. But I'll go ahead and give you a glimpse of who I think it would be now. But if I could have 2 hours to talk to my top three coaches all time, dead or alive, it would be kind of easy for me, to be honest with you. It would be Newt Rockne, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I would want to talk about innovation and just
because he was
pick his brain about, like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? The second one would be Eric Parsegian, just because I would want to talk to him just about, just the from what I hear from guys that played there, just the value he put on developing men, not just football players, but developing men. I would want to know how he changed the culture of that program. So it'd be a little bit of a different conversation. Because, another thought is to go with Frank Leahy. Because I would love to talk to Frank Leahy about, like, what was it like having to run a program during and after a world war, like where he had to step away for a time because he served. You had players serving. I mean, and all those types of things. And just that would be a fascinating conversation from a historical standpoint. But I'd probably lean away from that just because I would want to talk to him more about some other historical topics. And then, my third would probably be Coach Holtz. I would love to hear from him. Nice. Lou, Era, and Rockne. I love it. Love it. Because I would want to talk to him. I just would want to hear stories from him just about those times. And just,
it's such a great storyteller. Like every time I hear him talk, I'm just like, he's got me. Like I'm there, I'm in. And for all the same reasons, and the innovation part of Newt Rockne, I think is a big one. Like that, right. I don't think people really understand and appreciate how much of an innovator he was, all the way back to when he was a player and the forward pass and all of that stuff, and then when he became a coach and building a giant stadium and knowing that he could fill it, and all of these different things. I don't think people give him a lot of credit. Well, they give him credit, but I don't necessarily think
they don't give him enough credit for the innovative. Right. They give him credit for being a phenomenal coach, but I don't think they give him enough credit for being innovative.
The innovation of going to California to play a game.
That's what made me laugh when all the Notre Dame, the old heads would talk about, not wanting turf and not wanting a scoreboard because it's tradition. And I'm like, Newt Rockne would have been the first dude to get field turf if it was a thing back then.
To get a video board.
100%. 100%. I mean, there's no doubt about it to me. Now, would the school have let him? That's a different conversation. But I mean, there's no question about it. He would have definitely been there.
Are you going to touch the overrated part?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways I want to look at this, and because I think overrated could mean you still think a guy's a great coach, but maybe wasn't as great as maybe people make him out to be. Right. And so that, this is gonna ruffle some feathers.
You're gonna ruffle feathers. That's what
you're gonna ruffle some feathers. But I think Bear Bryant's overrated.
Ooh.
Now, I think Bear Bryant's a phenomenal coach. I think he's a Hall of Famer and all that. But there's a lot of people that view him as the greatest coach of all time, and I have a hard time with that. Because I don't think he is the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion. I think he is a great coach. I think he did a lot of good things, but He just isn't the greatest. So I
Sure.
think he's overrated from that standpoint. He's not overrated in like he's not a great coach. He's overrated from the standpoint of I just think they make a little bit too much out of what he did. And like Alabama still considers 1973 a national title, so when they talk about how Bear Bryant won 6 national titles, I'm like, that's because Alabama counts titles as when they were, because some people would hand out titles before the bowls.
Right.
And Alabama was number 1 in 1973 when then they went out and lost to the Sugar Bowl to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame won the championship, but Alabama still claims that as a championship. Right. So I just have a hard time kind of accepting some of those titles that people claim for Alabama, in my opinion. So, I mean, I'm looking at it here in 2 of the 6 titles that they claim. One year he finished 4th in the coaches poll, and the other he finished 2nd in the coaches poll, but they still claim national championships at Alabama.
Yeah.
So I think he was a great coach, but I just don't think he was quite, and the part that people often overlook is not just the Texas A&M success he had with the Junction Boys and all that, but also he had success in Kentucky before Texas A&M. So, I mean, he is a great coach. He is a top 5 coach. I just don't view him as the best that people make him out to be. And that's kind of my issue there. I have a buddy of mine who, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Vince, try his best. Oh, Joe Paterno's another one. I think Joe Paterno was a great coach, but I think Joe Paterno, who's ranked as like top 5 to 10, I haven't, maybe that's a personal thing, and it has nothing to do with the stuff that happened that we found out after the fact. That's a different, it's like, to me, that's like evaluating Pete Rose off of
you can evaluate him as a player.
Right. Like that's more of a human being evaluation.
Right.
I'm just talking as a coach. I thought that Paterno for a lot of years feasted on really soft schedules.
And I also feel like, and maybe this isn't even a scratch on him, but at the same time, I felt like the last 10 or 15 years, I didn't feel like he was really doing a whole lot. At least it didn't feel like that. It was his assistant coaches that were kind of running the ship, and he was almost like a figurehead. Now, maybe he had earned it at that point, and that's fine. A lot of coaches do a lot of good things as the figurehead, but it just didn't feel like he was putting in the work. I don't, and that's just a perception. I don't know anything about Ohio State football behind the scenes, and so that is my perception. It just felt like he was just kind of standing there on the sidelines while all the other coaches were doing the coaching.
Yeah.
So
see, that's game day, but I think there was a lot that went into it during the week that he did. But no, I to your point, I that's also part of the reason I view him as being a little bit overrated, to be honest with you. So those are the 2 that kind of pop in my head as overrated. And I have a friend of mine that views Bo Schembechler as hugely overrated because he never won a national title. And I understand that. And I think there's some validity to that. I mean, all those years you couldn't have one team win it all. I feel like I don't think anyone views Bo as a top 10 coach. And if he was viewed as a top 10 coach, like the ESPN best of all time, they had him 20th. That's very fair. That's not overrated. He's a 15 to 20 kind of guy for me.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a very fair rating. And but if you were to tell me he's one of the 5 to 10 best coaches ever, I'd say, dude, that's overrated. No, he's not that. Because again, had one undefeated season in 1973. Never had another undefeated season. Went 1, 2, 3, 4, lost his first 5 Rose Bowls. Then he finally won one. Then he lost the next one, and then he went like 2-8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He went 2-8 in Rose Bowls. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, he wasn't a great coach. He wasn't he wasn't a elite coach, but he was a very good coach for a long time. And so like his ranking to me seems about right. 15 to 20. I still said 15. I said 20 to 25 is kind of where I would put him all time. I think that's a pretty fair place. And so I would, and then the other one for me is Vince Dooley. I'd put Vince Dooley in there. Like he won that one title with Herschel Walker. But if you look at Vince Dooley outside of those Herschel Walker teams, he was a good coach, but he was not a guy that people should be considering like this legendary Hall of Fame coach. I mean, he was there for a long time. I mean, I get that, but he's
one spot behind Lou Holtz.
Yeah, like if you take away his tenure with Herschel Walker, he's not even a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. And so I think Vince Dooley is one of absolutely the most overrated coaches of all time from Georgia. So those are my guys that I'd put in the overrated list.
Fair enough. Yeah. All right. Can be back to the questions here. Benjamin wants to know, what player on the D-line can you see surprising us this season and taking a big jump in numbers?
Well, that all depends on who you view as like not expecting. Like,
Right.
I think that answer is going to surprising is going to be different people. Like, if you were to ask me, okay, if you were to tell me, hey, Riley Mills is going to have a really nice breakout, have 6-7 sacks and 9-10 tackles for loss, is that going to surprise me? No, that's not going to surprise me. But if I were to say that to somebody else, they may be like, wow, that really surprises me. So
Because he's the
I
first
think
thing in my mind was
right.
because if you just look at it from a production standpoint, last year to this year, it's Riley Mills. Like that.
Yeah.
That to me would be the guy.
I think it's going to be Justin Adamiola or Howard Cross. And the reason I'm going with Justin is I don't think people realize how productive Justin is. If I were to ask people who was the number 2 leader, number 2 guy in sacks last year, I think because people in this chat might know the answer because we've said it before, and this is a smart, observant group of folks. But if you were asked like the normal Notre Dame fan, who was number 2 on the team in sacks last year, I don't think a lot of people would immediately jump to Justin Adamiola, right? And so I think he's going to really surprise some people this year. Some things I've heard from a few different sources about how well he performed this spring. I think he's going to have a really good year, and I think that would be a surprise because I don't think he's going to be a starter. He's going to be a rotation guy, but he's going to be a starter in, maybe his snaps are going to be similar to what starters are, but he's not going to be a starter. But I think he's going to have a really productive year. And Howard Cross would be the other one because including me, I'm not someone who's like, oh yeah, Howard Cross is going to be a dominant player. I'm nervous about a 265-pound guy being nose guard. But everybody I talk to says all the dude does is just make plays. He's hard to block. And that's the thing that's strange is like, okay, because I didn't get to see a lot of the D-line practices. Every time you guys were there, they would go outside. So we didn't get a chance to see him a lot. Right. But every time I would hear about him, it would always be like the same thing of, Howard did this today and Howard did that today and he made this play today. And it's just like, yeah, he's small and undersized and short and all that, but they can't block him. Yeah. And it's true when he got on the field last year. I mean, he was a very disruptive player in limited opportunities. The question is, can he do it when you double the snaps? That's going to be a greater question. But I think he's another guy that could end up being a surprise. And then my final contender for surprises, it would not shock me if Alexander Ahrensberger breaks out as a nice rotation player this year, like a really productive rotation player. I don't think the reason I think we all expect Jason Adamiola to be a really good player. We all expect Foskey. So I try to go a little bit of a different direction on that. So absolutely. Did you have anybody that you think should be in that conversation?
No, I mean, you hit the guys on the D line. I mean, it's a very specific question. You know what I mean? So those are the guys I would have mentioned. I think the Justin Adamiola thing is very valid because I still think that he takes a backseat to his brother. They play 2 completely different positions. But they're in the same position group, and so I feel like he takes a back
seat from a recognition standpoint. But he's produced more than Jason,
right? But that's what I'm referring to from a recognition standpoint. Even within the fan base, I think he takes a back seat to his brother because he's always kind of been a rotation guy at the defensive end position, and Jason was a starter first. So, I think he takes a back seat. So I think it would surprise a lot of people if Justin continues on the ascent that he's been on. Like, I don't even think he needs to be a Superman. I think he just needs to continue getting better, and the numbers are going to take care of themselves. So yeah, I like that one a lot. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. There we go. Corey D with the super chat. Thank you very much, Corey. I think Notre Dame will be the next college football dynasty. Woo! Will they replace Bama? But no, but 2 or 3 titles in the next 7 to 10 years seems possible to me. Am I crazy?
It said replicate Bama, which I think refers to no. It's fair. It changes a little bit of the context, which means more like, are they going to have 6 titles in
10 years,
13-year span? No, I don't think so. I don't think that what Bama has done the last 13 years is, I don't see something that happens again, at least not in my lifetime, because most dynasties weren't 6 titles in that period of time. And I also think there's a couple asterisks on there because I don't think Bama deserved a shot to play for the 2011 title. Had no business being in that game. It was a rematch against a team that already beat them on their own home field, right? I mean, I'm sorry, that Oklahoma State should have been playing LSU in that game, right? Which that would have been crazy because there's a chance. I think Oklahoma State would have won that game, but there's a chance Les Miles could have had 2 national titles if that were to happen, which is kind of disgusting and gross, and just shows that it's not as hard as people think to win at LSU. But I think Mike Gundy's team would have beat them that year. That was a great Oklahoma State. I mean, they beat a really good Stanford team in the Fiesta Bowl, if you remember correctly, in a shootout. But I mean, so okay, so they should have only had 5 titles, in Saban's tenure. That's still amazing. But I think Notre Dame has a chance. I mean, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're feeding into the excitement of Marcus Freeman and his staff. I need to see him coach games first. I'll say this. If Marcus Freeman is as good of a coach as he is a recruiter, and I only say that because we just haven't seen him coach a game yet with his staff, right? This isn't I don't question it. Everyone knows I've had a lot of faith in Coach Freeman since he got hired as the coordinator, but I'll say the same thing about him as a head coach that I said last year at this time as a defensive coordinator. Can we just see him coach a game first before we start talking about him being the next head coach, or now it's, the Notre Dame dynasty? I will say this. If he's the coach that I think he is, and if he coaches like he recruits and continues to make hires in the manner in which he made hires this offseason, it's possible, and I would not call you crazy. Will it happen? I don't know. But it's certainly possible, and I'd be more surprised if they didn't win a title than if they did if he coaches like he recruits, because I think they will win a title in the next 4 years if he can coach like he recruits. I truly believe that, because and the reason I said is Notre Dame is ascending as 2 of the other dynasties of this recent era are descending. And that's usually when you start to see a team kind of sneak in and get that title. So I think Clemson and Alabama are slowly coming back to life, and Clemson faster than Alabama. And then as Notre Dame and Georgia are ascending. And, I think that's going to be an interesting battle here in a few years.
Yeah, I think 2 to 3 in 7 to 10 years. I think that's possible. I think that's possible. I don't want to go out and fanboy predict that that's absolutely going to.
The last time that happened, Frank Leahy was the head coach.
Yeah, I mean,
Luke couldn't do it. Eric couldn't do it.
It's nuts.
3,
I don't want to.
3. Sorry, 3. I'm talking about 2. 2 is different. That third one is the one that gets me Vince.
And I don't want to say that Notre Dame would even sneak up on people. I think that
the first one would be.
If things go the way they're trending and things are going the way they're going, and the coaching matches the recruiting, and that's not always the case. Okay, I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. But I like what I saw in the spring from the coaching staff. I like where things are. I think the recruiting is headed obviously in the right direction. When you recruit well, you have staying power. It's not like a one and done kind of situation. With like an Oregon, for example, if they're really good one year or whatever. Name your team that jumps into the college football playoff for 1 year and then they're never heard of from again on the national stage, right? I don't think Notre Dame is that. I think Notre Dame can sustain success, but it's very difficult to win a national championship. So do I think 2 to 3 is possible in 10 years? Yeah, sure. I think it'd be a heck of a lot of fun to cover that and to be a fan. No question about it, right? That would be fantastic. So I like where things are trending. Do I think it's possible? Yes. Am I going to predict it? No, I'm not ready to do that just yet. But man, it's a good time to be a Notre Dame fan. It's a good time to cover Notre Dame. Let's put it that way. So
yeah,
I like where your head's at, Corey. I hope and pray that that's the case. Yeah. Let's just put it that way for many reasons.
Yeah. I would say this. I think that what would most likely happen is I think what made Bama unique is Bama got really good at a time when no other programs were great.
It was them and everybody else. I agree with that.
And so it's partly the greatness of what Nick Saban did, and partly because other programs just made bad hires. Like Florida State made some bad hires during that stretch. And
Alabama how did Alabama start it? With the recruiting.
Yeah.
They started knocking it out of the park with the recruiting, and all of a sudden they were really good.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big – but, I thought the SEC was down for a chunk of their tenure. There were some bad coaches in the league. He's battling Hugh Freeze and Kevin Sumlin, who are good coaches but not elite coaches, and they beat them. But, I think the coaching in the SEC has jumped up a notch. I think that, Texas was down during a big chunk of his tenure. USC sucked his entire tenure at Alabama, basically.
True.
Notre Dame was good but not didn't have a dynamic coach. They're just, it's why Clemson emerged, because I think other programs, there was, Urban Meyer was a great coach at Ohio State, but he had so many other issues that I think it distracted the program from reaching its full potential.
Clemson they did a good job of taking advantage of a league that
stunk.
I mean, for lack of a better term, right? And
here's what I'll give Dabo credit, though.
I'm to Clemson.
Here's what I'll give Dabo credit. Yes, they played bad schedules, but they won almost every big game they played in. Regular season, they beat Georgia, they beat Auburn, and then when they were the only team that wasn't afraid of Bama. And you got to give them credit for being willing to step up and not be afraid of the big bully.
Sure.
Like everybody else was. And so I give them a lot of credit for that. And look, if you think about it, like Dabo's like 2-2 against Bama, right? In the postseason. So lost in 15, beat him in 16, lost in 17, beat him in 18, right? They haven't played since then, correct? So 2-2. And he's 3-1 against Ohio State. And I mean, that's
look, we're talking about coaches that we think are overrated or whatever. I like Dabo. I know that his act, what people call his act, can get tired on some people.
I don't think it's an act, though. That's my thing. Whether you like him or not, I think that's who he is.
That's my exact point. Like, I don't think it's an act. I think that he's just kind of an aw shucks guy, but he's very confident aw shucks guy. Like, I remember the day he was hired, and I don't know why I remember this, but there was a TV on in a smoothie shop. My wife was getting a smoothie, and they announced that Dabo Swinney was going to be the head coach at Clemson. I was like, oh, okay. Like,
I was like, my first thought was, that's stupid.
No, I was like, I kind of like this guy. Let's see what he can do.
No, I liked Dabo, his all shucks and his, the things he says about his faith, I think, are genuine. Every recruit that I've ever talked to feels the same way. Like, Dabo's a real genuine guy. Yeah. And I get why some people don't like him, because same reason that a lot of people don't like Tim Tebow. Let's be honest about that. It's not because they think he's an overrated player. It's because he's very outspoken about his faith, and there's a lot of people who don't like that, and that's fine. Whatever, it is what it is. But look, he did a great job of taking advantage of the circumstances, and that's a big part of success. Is circumstances went your way. Are you going to take advantage of it or not?
Right.
And I thought that Notre Dame, to a degree, took advantage of USC and Stanford being down. Not to the degree they should have or could have, but to build to where they can get to where they are now. I talked yesterday about how Mark D'Antonio took advantage of the fact that Michigan had made a couple bad hires at head coach, and he took full advantage by using that to build Michigan State up and have some success. Well, now, we all realize that Jim Harbaugh is overrated, but he's still a good football coach.
Sure.
And Ohio State's now more of a threat, and Wisconsin's good. I mean, and Michigan State's kind of gone down. There's some other reasons they went down, but he was able to build them into a playoff team, a Rose Bowl team, 1 year, playoff team another year, mainly because Michigan was down, right? And Nick Saban took advantage of that, and Dabo took advantage of that, and that's what great coaches do. You step into that, because it's not everyone. Whoever pick any coach and put him at Bama, they don't take advantage of it the way that Saban did. I mean, you got to be a great coach to take advantage of it.
Oh, no question. He did a lot of great innovative things down there.
Yeah, Urban did that at Ohio State. The Big Ten was down during his tenure there. It was really down, and he took advantage. And like he did at Florida, he took advantage of SEC being down. Well, then when the SEC got a little bit tougher and Saban shows up and kicks his butt, heart problems. I got to step away, That's just kind of who Urban is. I mean, if we're going to be honest about it. But still a great coach, just
other issues.
Yeah, first-class D-bag. Sorry, there's no other way to say it. He just is. So, just is.
Punches, I love it. All right, here we go. A little bit of a recruiting question here. I know this one's right up your alley from John. He says, in the last 4 recruiting cycles, would you grade Notre Dame higher or lower than the recruiting services? It's a loaded question because there's multiple services. So you want to find a composite list to go off of?
Well, no, I'm pulling up their class rankings. Let me see here. So trying to find what their classes were ranked in recent years. Give me a second. So I've got the recruiting breakdown here on my desktop. So if you just give me a second to find it, I tend to think that Notre Dame's recruiting classes get underrated. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that if you look at like 247 Sports, Last year's class was ranked 6th. It's about where I would say it should have been. I thought the 2021 class was a little underrated at 10. It was 9 by Rivals. It was 10 by 247 Sports. That includes the Blake Fisher, Tyler Buckner. I didn't think the recruits on offense got enough love. I didn't think that I thought that Tyler Buckner got dropped more than he should have.
Yeah, well, because they didn't see him play.
Right.
I mean, I think that was obviously the reason why, but yeah.
I mean, ESPN had Blake Fisher outside the top 100. I mean, there's no Rivals had him ranked in the top 25. They had him ranked correctly, but like
grading out that class was monumentally difficult. And I'm not giving them a pass, but there were so many kids that either didn't play their senior year or played a very abbreviated schedule. So there's a huge jump for kids from junior to senior year.
And they put so much emphasis on camps, and that class was one of those ones that didn't have camps there last year and all that.
Camps are important, don't get me wrong, but they're not the be-all, end-all.
Yeah. I thought Lorenzo Styles didn't get enough of a jump for his senior year. But you look at like Blake Fisher, for example. You know, Blake was ranked 104th by ESPN, 86 by On3, 86 by 247 Sports. That never made sense to me. He was a top 50 recruit easy. Buckner was a top 50 recruit easy. And I never understood why he didn't get more respect. I thought Lorenzo Styles didn't get enough love from people. I mean, 247 had him as the number 132 player in the country. ESPN had him at number 247. I thought that was nuts. Notice a pattern here with ESPN. On3 had him at 33. Rivals had him at 55. That's more of where his range should have been. Like that 50 to 60, 70 range is where I thought he should have been. There just was some guys in that class I looked at and was like, man, you know, that guy's being underrated for sure. And so, you know, I thought Logan Diggs was wildly underrated. I thought Ryan Barnes was wildly underrated. But again, a lot of that had to do with COVID, right?
Exactly.
And the fact that they didn't get to see those guys play. And, you know, and so I thought there was just some really underrated players in that class that were ranked way lower than they should have. Should have been a top 5 class, but it shouldn't have been up another 2 or 3 spots. The 2020 class is interesting, Vince, because I have a hard time. It was 22 on Rivals, and 20 on the 247 Sports composite ranking. And I had a really hard time with that one because I just don't know how you can look at a class that had Michael Mayer, Chris Tyree, Jordan Johnson, Tosh Baker, Jordan Patelho, Riley Mills, and say there was 20 classes better. Now, should it have been a top 10 class? No. They completely whiffed at linebacker. They completely whiffed. I mean, because Jordan Patel was projected as a defensive end. They came up short on numbers on the offensive line. Like they had some misses in that class, but it definitely wasn't. There wasn't 21 classes better than them. There just wasn't, in my opinion. And so I look at that class and I think that class is underrated, but not like oh, it should have been 10th and it was 20th. It should have been like 15th, 14th or 15th, in my opinion. And the 2019 class actually is a really interesting one to talk about, Vince, because I actually thought that class by some was maybe a little overrated, to be honest with you. But it was a good class. I thought there were some players in that class that were underrated. It had Kyle Hamilton. It had Isaiah Foskey. I thought he was underrated. But there's some misses, like, in my opinion. So that maybe a tad overrated. Like some had it 13, 14. I thought that one was say maybe overrated. I say maybe that's the most fair. I think that's where that class should have been, because Brandon Clark was a nice recovery pickup, but he wasn't a top quarterback to me. Now it ended up turning out really well because Kyron Williams ended up being a really good player, but I didn't think Kyron Williams was going to be what he was coming out of high school.
He was way underrated coming out of high school
based on what he turned out to be.
Right, but he was properly rated at the time. I
felt he was. I felt he was. I thought Cam Hart was vastly underrated coming out of that class. But, so that was like a top 15 class that was a typical Brian Kelly class. Really good at the top, really shaky afterwards.
Yeah, right.
So that was one, and I thought the 2018 class was a little bit underrated as well. It hasn't panned out, but I thought it was underrated at the time. So yeah, good question.
Benjamin says, do you think Tommy Rees will mix up the pass concepts more this season with better coached receivers?
I think we'll see a lot of I think the difference, Vince, is I don't know if we'll see more concepts as much as we'll see them be more effective against everybody, not just the teams that stink.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what we saw last year. Is they were pretty good against teams that didn't have very good defenses. And the exception being the bowl game where they shredded a pretty good defense with the pass game.
Right.
But you don't have a month to prepare for every other game.
True.
And that's another reason why, bowl games, look, bowl games and openers, you've heard me say this before, Vince, I don't put as much stock in bowl games and openers unless the bowl game there's something on the line.
Right.
And even then it's kind of like there's a reason, it's easier for some teams to be prepared for a bowl game than it is for others because they have the more talented roster and it can get healthy and fresh and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think what we saw is because the defenses they played weren't as good, the stuff they like to use was more effective. I think with a better coached receiving core, it's not so much about adding a bunch of stuff or mixing a lot of things up. I think your head's in the right place, Benjamin. It's just more of they had to limit their stuff even more against the better teams because they couldn't protect the quarterback and because of the fact the receivers couldn't get off the press. I think what we'll see most likely, at least is what I'm hoping for, is that the offense that we saw in the final 6 games is what we'll see all the time.
Yeah.
Even against the good teams in the schedule.
Right.
And that's kind of an even better version of it because you'll have even better staff. But that's what I think the hope is. It's not so much an expanded pass concepts. It's more of a more effective. The stuff you use is more effective because of better coaching. And that's kind of
better
what
execution and all of the above.
Which comes from better coaching. Right.
100%. Kind of got a 2-part question from 2 different guys. So that's a first for us. John starts off, was Carlisle Holiday underdeveloped, or did he maximize his potential as a player at Notre Dame? And then John chimes in. He says, follow up to John's question, how good of a quarterback could Arnaz Battle have been?
I never thought Arnaz Battle was a quarterback. I always thought Arnaz was always a guy that should have played another position.
Yeah, an athlete. Just needed to,
Carlisle's a little bit different. I think the thing that hurt Carlisle Holiday is because he was it 2000 that he was a freshman?
Like that, yeah, that sounds about right.
1990. I can't remember. It was 2000. It was the year that Notre Dame went to the Fiesta Bowl and got blasted by Oregon State. Because remember, he was part of a freshman class. Somebody had mentioned Abram Elam but Abram Elam was not really a quarterback. But that was the year that they got Jared Clark, Carlisle Holiday, and Matt LaVecchio at quarterback. And Matt LaVecchio was the lowest ranked guy of that group. And I never felt like that Carlisle really got a shot. You had Kevin Rogers was your offensive coordinator the first 2 years. Then you had the coaching change and you went to Ty and his West Coast offense. And that just didn't really fit what Carlisle did. If Carlisle would have played under Lou Holtz, I think Carlisle would have been nasty. Because I mean, Kevin Rogers tried to run because there's like a lot of hope. He was like, the offensive coordinator. I think he had worked with he worked like Donovan McNabb, or was it maybe it was Marvin Graves? I think it might have been, but he was at Syracuse for a little bit, and there was just a lot of hope that he was gonna be a guy that could kind of get the quarterback playing the offense back on track, and he ended up not being very good. And Carlisle just never got developed, in my opinion. Carlisle needed to run a Lou Holtz offense. That's what he needed to run. Right. And they were trying to run like this power offense. It was really strange. It seemed like it had no purpose. And you're just trying to like pull a few things together and clump them all together. And it was just really odd. But, I think he was definitely underdeveloped, in my opinion, at Notre Dame and didn't maximize his potential because I don't think he was given the opportunity to maximize his potential. I don't think you can maximize your potential in college without good coaching. I mean, like that's what we were talking about Alabama earlier. That's where Nick Saban's never gotten enough credit. You don't win as much as he did, as long as he did, just because you have better players.
Right.
Just don't.
Right.
Otherwise, Florida State would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
Just Tennessee would have been better. USC would be better. You need good coaching as well, and he never got that, in my opinion. But Arnaz, I always thought was a receiver. He was always a guy that I thought should have played another position.
Kish squared. Why isn't the wildcat formation more successful? The quarterback is a wasted player on a running play, and with enough simple throw mix-ins to keep the DBs honest, it seems like a powerful option.
I think it's limited. I think is the issue. It's limited, right?
That's the problem.
I think the only way you can make the wildcat work is basically, I think the closest offense you could find to making the wildcat work is if you were able to kind of sort of, if Chris Alt's pistol and Paul Johnson's triple option had a baby. I think that offense might be able to work in a wildcat type of situation, but it limits you. That's the problem. It limits you. There's only so many things you can do.
Quarterback, right? Like that's the whole point. Right. He has a small package of plays because he doesn't practice at quarterback,
right?
So it's probably 2 to 3 run plays.
I think even if you went full time, Vince, I think it's still limiting. You know, I mean, like. Also,
because
I get the impression he's talking about, like if you just went to it full time, so there isn't a quarterback on the field. Yeah, like I think that's what he, more permanent part of your offense.
I would also say the Wildcat was more used before the RPOs kind of came into play. I feel like RPOs is in a more advanced manner of the Wildcat idea.
And what happened with the Wildcat is this is kind of what happens when things are innovative. It works at first and then stops working. People are like, wait a minute, why didn't it work anymore? You should have stuck with it. Well, it didn't work because people figured it out. I mean, once people figure it out and you're limited to what you can do, it's easy to stop it. Right. And that's, that kind of
doesn't mean I don't want to see Avery Davis take a snap or two. Just saying.
Right. I love it as a wrinkle. I mean, how many times have I begged for that? But it shouldn't be a staple of what you do, in my opinion.
Absolutely correct. We got another super chat from Alan. Thank you very much, Alan. Have the captains been set, or are there rumors of who it could be? They have not been set yet. I know that.
No, they have not.
Freeman actually said something along the lines of, he's like, we're pretty much going to let summer play out and see how things go. And then
smart.
Absolutely.
Smart. I mean, look, I expect Jarrett Patterson to be a captain. I expect Avery Davis to be a captain. I mean, those guys were already captains. I mean, I think the guys
captain?
That were,
I thought he was. Was Foskey a captain?
No.
Wasn't he? Okay.
No, he wasn't. I mean, we didn't even know if he was. Yeah, he was a first-year starter. He wasn't the captain last year. Yeah.
Corey D with a super chat on
Mark Rogers.
Well, Mark Rogers. I thought it was Mr. Rogers. That's on Rogers.
Mark Rogers.
He was talking to Ohio State guys. I said, ND is a bigger brand than Ohio State, and everyone, including Rogers, said I was crazy.
Well, I love Mark. Mark's my guy, but he's also an Ohio State guy. So, of course, he's going to say that. I mean, and I think they genuinely believe it, but you asked a bunch of Ohio State fans to give an objective answer about Ohio State.
Not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Right. So, no. I mean, look, has Ohio State been a better football program than Notre Dame for a very long time? Yes. The problem is too many people don't understand the difference between what is a good football program and a brand, right? I mean, that's the difference.
Right. Absolutely.
It's Notre Dame may not have been a great football program for a long time, but the brand has always been the same. That's why everybody hates it so much.
Exactly.
And there's parts of this country where what do you think of Ohio State? I don't care. I don't have any opinion on Ohio State. What do you think of Notre Dame? Oh, I freaking hate Notre Dame. They suck. Right. Okay.
Brand.
Well, there you go. Brand. Right. Brand. And so, I mean, if Ohio State could have their own TV network, they would, right? That's the thing. Texas tried it, and it didn't work.
Right.
And Notre Dame can, and that's the difference. And so they don't understand the difference between brand and quality of your program. Like Alabama is a far greater football program than Notre Dame, far greater. But they're not the brand that Notre Dame is, because it doesn't have to do with on-field success, and that's what people miss in that conversation.
Oh, Toe Jam. Here we go. Thank you for the super chat, first of all. This is really funny. He says, happy Friday and happy Memorial Day to all of our vets. Brian, is it true that the only 5-star Brian Kelly has ever successfully recruited is the 5-star pastry chef at LSU's fancy national champion worthy cafeteria?
The hate for Brian Kelly just flows.
I'm surprised somebody in the chat. Now, I haven't been down at the bottom. We were talking about overrated coaches. Like somebody didn't bring that up. Maybe they did.
Well, and I don't think Brian Kelly is an overrated coach, because I think he coached also in an era where there weren't a lot of great coaches. I mean, who are you going to put ahead of him right now? I mean, we know all the things we know about Brian Kelly, but the reality is
a wins-loss standpoint, I mean,
right.
he's overrated by people who hired him at LSU. But
correct. He's overpaid.
Right.
I wouldn't say he's overrated.
Well, and they pay is commensurate with rating if you're paying.
Now, I think he'll fall as you're seeing more coaches like Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning and Billy Napier starting to get head coaching jobs at bigger schools. He's going to fall down. Mario Cristobal continues to emerge and evolve. I think
you in the future, just
right. But Kelly was a coach at a time when a lot of programs were in sort of transition. I think, and he took, and it's like we talked about earlier, he took advantage of that, and he took advantage of Florida State being down. And he took advantage of a lot of different things. And so, like since 18, Notre Dame has played Florida State 3 times. And they went 3-0. You don't beat Florida State 3 out of 4 years when they're in their dynasty phase. You may win 1 or 2, but you're going to lose one of them, and they barely beat Florida State this year, and Florida State stunk, right? I mean, what if Florida State was good? Notre Dame catches an L to start the season. So, I mean, but that's not you don't penalize Brian Kelly because Florida State sucked. He did what he needed. He handled his business, right? But obviously, in all seriousness, I mean, Notre Dame's recruited several 5-star players. So during Kelly's tenure, not enough. And if you are on the message board, there was an interesting tidbit that Ryan Roberts had about Braylon James recruitment that I found interesting in regards to Brian Kelly and all of that stuff, but you're gonna have to be on the message board to see that one, Vince. But
Brian Roberts. Let's bring him into the conversation here.
But the 5-star pastry chef at LSU's fans, that's just, I mean, it's like when you say things like that, you leave yourself up to ridicule. Like, people say like he missaid family, and it's like he wasn't doing a fake accent, but he got caught between 2 words, which happens. But if you listen to the whole sentence, he's faking a Southern accent the whole freaking time, right? So, I mean, but you do that stuff to yourself. And what did we always talk about when he was still here, right? It was the unforced errors that he had. That's what did him in. But, I mean, Brian Kelly was a guy that frustrated me, is a guy that did not maximize the program. He wasn't a good person. There's all the reasons I dislike him. But he also wasn't a bum who lucked his way in to 5 straight 10+ win seasons.
I agree with that. Yeah,
right? We need to be able to have if we're going to be. I mean, if we want to just take shots, we can take shots. But if we're going to have an honest conversation about Brian Kelly, he gets more credit than he deserves for Notre Dame's success by some. He doesn't get enough credit for his role in the success as he does as he should from others. And I think that's but he brings it on himself because you're a jerk. And you keep running your mouth, and you keep throwing players in the bus. Your whole career, you threw players in the bus. And so when you do things like that, of course, people are going to dislike you. And the other thing, too, is he did not get out of the program what he should have got out of the program, but yet kept saying the program is what was holding him back. And that ultimately is what's going to doom him from a perception standpoint. But he also wasn't a bum who just bumbled his way into 100 whatever wins either. We need to be, if we're going to have an honest conversation about it, then we need to be able to find that happy medium with Brian Kelly.
Agreed. All right, I'm going to set you guys up with this one, and then I'm going to take off. And here we go. Sheldon,
actually, no, Vince, go ahead and set the one up that you're going to do, and I get to Sheldon's super chat here in a little bit. Go ahead.
Brian, if you were the head coach of the 2015 team and you could build your staff, would Ryan be the linebackers coach? That's why
you couldn't have waited. You couldn't have pulled that up before Ryan was on the show.
Well, that was the next one in the queue, brother.
So messed up. Right. I mean, it's either him or Brian Van Gorder, right? So, I mean, it's like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, I would have hired a real defensive coordinator, and if I'd hired a real defensive coordinator, had Ryan Roberts as my linebacker coach, I would have had more success than what Notre Dame had with Brian Van Gorder.
Two kinds.
Not wrong.
So that's the standard. You're better than Brian Van Gorder. All right, there you go.
I appreciate. Hey, I'll take what I can get today, man. I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, Brian Van Gorder killing me. It's killing me with these questions today, Ryan. So he could have waited, but no, I think in all seriousness, though, if you could build the 2015 staff, I've said this before. If you just give them the 2017 defensive coaching staff, that team probably wins a title. I believe that. I mean, that team was so loaded with players. It's not even funny.
Can you roll through? Can you roll through the 2017 defensive staff real quick?
Yeah, you had Mike Elko as your defensive coordinator. You had Clark Lee as your linebackers coach. You had Mike Elston coaching D line. You had Todd Light coaching DBs, and I think I think Terry Joseph. I think that was Terry Joseph's first season at Notre Dame, I believe. Let me just check that here real quick. But when did Terry arrive at Notre Dame? Let's see here. I could be wrong, and it might have been Todd Light was the entire secondary coach in 2017. So I'll have to look that up here real quick. But yeah, I mean, just Elko and Lee and Elston and Light was a much better product. I mean, just even if you just traded out the defensive coordinator, that's really what it boils down to. Because I didn't feel like the 2015 the whole defensive coaching staff was bad. I mean, Keith Gilmore was a good defensive line coach. He'd been a long time vet. You had Todd Light as your DB's coach. You had Mike Elson was technically your linebackers coach, but then you had Brian Van Gorder just kind of jacking the whole thing up. And that's the other thing. You only had 4 defensive coaches. I think that hurt it as well. But the 2017 staff was the guys that I mentioned. I think Todd Light was Todd Light coached the entire secondary back then. And then they had like GAs helping out with that as well. But yes, that was the staff, which was significantly better than one with Brian Van Gorder on it. And I think Mike Elson's a better D-line coach than he is a linebackers coach, in my opinion.
Agree. Did they have any GAs of note that year, to your recollection?
They had a couple guys. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that worked with the safeties. It did a really nice job. And I just, for the life of me, cannot remember what his name was. But they had a guy that worked with the safeties that did a nice job. Because Elko was the safeties coach, but he would also do other things. And then they had a kid, Tyler, I forget his name. I think Santucci, something like that. But he was a guy that Elko brought with him from Wake as an analyst, but he basically coached the Rovers. And then he took him with him to Texas A&M. So he was another guy that Elko had a lot of faith in, that let him do a lot of coaching. I believe Nick Lazinski was part of that. No, he came later, I think. But yeah, they had a couple analyst GA guys that people liked. I think Larry Black might have been part of that group too. I could be wrong on it. Let me look up Larry Black's tenure, because he was a guy that was a really good GA as a D-line coach. And he's at Toledo now as a D-line coach. He's a guy that, that I've mentioned in the past as someone who I could see coming back and working at Notre Dame. Yeah, he was the D-line GA on that 2017 team.
That's crazy.
And the kids loved him. Like, they liked him a lot. So they had a really nice situation from a GA analyst standpoint on that team.
Toledo gets a lot out of their defensive line. So to just kind of
he's done
his abilities.
Yep. And he's now at Vanderbilt. So this will be his first year at Vanderbilt, but he spent the last 3 years at Toledo. He's a really good football coach. So that was a good defensive staff. That was a very good defensive staff, no question about it. So I still say that to me, you had a dynamic quarterback, you had the best O-line in football, you had speed all over on offense, you had 10, 11 guys on your defense that played in the NFL. I mean, there was no reason for that team not to be better, and there's just no reason for it. No reason for it. Here's an interesting question, Ryan. Tavis McKay. Somebody put a video on our board, on our Facebook page the other day. And do you think Notre Dame would ever consider going to the SEC? Oklahoma media seems to be stating Oklahoma is trying to convince Notre Dame to join. Personally, I think it is blowing smoke, and no way Notre Dame would go. I don't see any universe in which Notre Dame goes to the SEC.
Yeah.
Notre Dame doesn't even think the Big Ten is a good enough academic conference for them to join. You think they're going to go to the freaking SEC? Come on now. Yeah. And if anybody knew, it's not a bunch of dudes running YouTube channels in Oklahoma. Okay. So now, is Oklahoma maybe trying to convince them to go with them? Maybe. I mean, why there's somebody from every conference in Notre Dame's ear trying to get them to join their conference all the time. That's just a given, right?
But Notre Dame's irrelevant, Brian. They can't be true.
Of course, 100%. It's just because they like the sparkly gold helmets. That's really what it's about. It just show it looks better on primetime TV. It's really what it is. Yeah, it's hilarious, man. Some of the stuff.
Keep Notre Dame independent, man. All I gotta say about it.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So Let's see here. Rob Osgood, what's the summer like for coaches and players? Camps, workouts, diet, etc. So none of them are on diets. Joking. I know that's not what you meant by that. Basically, the players report for summer school June 5th, and we'll start summer workouts shortly after that. It's a lot of cardio, a lot of conditioning, a lot of weightlifting, a lot of running, a lot of 7-on-7s. A lot of players coaching themselves, which I think is why one of the reasons I love the summer period. I think it's an incredibly important period from a building your team standpoint, because it's when the period where the leadership truly has to take over, because there's a lot of coaches are doing recruiting, they've got visits, there's all these things going on. Like if you think about what Notre Dame's got, camps, they've got the first week of June. Then after camps, you've got the June weekend of the 10th recruiting visits, the weekend of the 17th recruiting visits, all that kind of stuff. And then in July, some of the coaches are going to be leaving to go on vacation, which they should be because they've been grinding hard. But the players are still going to be here for chunks of that with doing summer school stuff. So that is such an important period, Ryan, for leadership to establish itself from a player standpoint. And I think at the end of the day, if you don't have great player leadership, it doesn't really matter what your coaching leadership is. It's not enough. You need both. And I think the summer period, when there's so much accountability where only you can hold each other accountable, because if Notre Dame coaches are out there mandatory making things mandatory, you've got to be at 7-on-7, you got to do this. That's illegal. You get in trouble for that. It's got to be the players say, hey, look, we're meeting every day at this time to do this, and this is what we're working on. That's where your team really you define how good your team is really going to be from a leadership standpoint during that summer period.
And to the question and to the part about the diet, I mean, one of my favorite things is seeing what the weight gain.
I'm waiting on the day for Ryan to pick up his computer and just throw it out the window, even though it's not a computer problem. But yeah, Ryan has now left the building, everybody. We're sorry for that. It is something we are working on. And if you're not patient enough to wait with us, that's fine. But if for everybody else that is, the 99.9%, we'll get it figured out. So let's get to some questions here, Vince. You're down there. Can you pull a couple of these up as we're working through this so as I get back on track? Okay, let's get to some questions here. All right. Shelton Hager, let's get to his super chat here. Let's go. He says, Brian and Vince, the top three coaches weren't all supposed to be Notre Dame coaches. Ha ha. But I totally agree with the three y'all picked. Well, I mean, it's the coaches you said that we would want to meet with, right? Spend time with. And for me, I feel those are all legends, and they were legends and the conversations would be for different reasons. And that's kind of what made it kind of a fun endeavor. It's kind of like if you were to say, if you could pick any football player to have dinner with, who would it be? Well, it'd be my favorite player, right? I mean, of course it would be. I'm not going to meet with OJ and ask him if he really did it. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to meet with guys that I respect and guys I want to spend time with. And so I would want to do it with my favorite players. So, although my one favorite player I probably wouldn't want to have dinner with is, if you were to ask me my favorite basketball player, I've heard Larry Bird's a bit of a curmudgeon, so I don't know how entertaining that dinner would be. But yeah, of course I'm going to pick my favorite team, but there's some legends to pick from for Notre Dame. Daniel Zolaki, thank you, Daniel, for the super chat very, very much. IB staff, love you guys and the hard work you put in to feed our Notre Dame fandom. You're welcome. If you could, with the snap of your fingers, how would you make Notre Dame Stadium a more hostile environment? Honestly, there's two things I would do. Three things I would do. Number one, if I could snap my fingers and make Notre Dame a great team, I would. Number two, I would improve the home schedule a little bit. I would. I mean, if I'm the football king for a day, I would probably get rid of the ACC schedule, to be honest with you. I think that has weakened the home slate a little bit. And then number three, I would make it cheaper. I would find other ways to generate revenue that would allow me to make it more affordable for the everyday fans. And I think that's where the passion comes from, right? I mean, it's just been my experience that the more everyday fans are the ones that are the most excited. And I would try my best to make it more affordable for those people to be able to go to games. That would be where I would want to come from. So, Tavis McKay, what is the process coaches go through before even offering a player? It varies from player to player. I think for me, it comes down to you've got to do a background check, right? I mean, sometimes it can be basic, sometimes it can be extensive, depends on the kid. You have to look at the academics. Does this kid even have a shot of being successful? Does this kid have a shot of making it academically, of getting into the school? You have to find those things out first. And so you'll throw offers out, and then whether or not they become committable or not is going to require that next level of background. Okay, now we really go through the admissions process. We really dive into the character. We really see if this guy's a football fit or not, and then go from it in that direction. So I think that's going to be the key. Coach Bent 574 has part 1 of 2, and it is, which will we see first? A tight end H-back with the run blocking of Trumbull, or a running back with the pass blocking of Williams? I definitely missed the pulling ability of Trumbull or counter Trey or split zone last year. I mean, I think we're going to see guys that are pass block like Williams. I think that's more of a skill set that's already there. I don't know if we'll see that from the tight ends. I just don't. It depends on how it shakes out. If Kane Barong earns a starting job this year or not a starting job, but if Kane Barong earns a rotation role for Notre Dame this year, I think it's going to be a situation where he's going to have an opportunity to play a lot into that similar role. John Klimek, what has been one of your most what the heck moments in recruiting? Man, it'd probably have to be the Noah Boykin commitment back in 2018. And this is set the stage for it. It was a really wild situation because we are at Notre Dame and we are getting ready to have the press conference, right? And Notre Dame is like, there's coaches in there. There's coaches sitting there that are going through sitting down, and here we're going to go through this process of doing a press conference and all this other kind of stuff. And then you're going to, you know that Noah Boykin's going to decide, but nobody was really paying a ton of attention to it because we had all been told you're going to be Virginia, Florida. Notre Dame wasn't really a factor. So I'm sitting in the back row because we had set up a mic stand because we were going to be doing interviews. So the coaches were going to talk, and then they were all going to walk around and do like different interviews. So we're sitting in the back of the auditorium, and Polian's down, and a couple other GAs are down, a couple like office people are down, and we kind of start hearing this commotion in the back office. So like there's a couple double doors that you got to go through, and then you go back into the coaches' offices. And so we're back there, and then all of a sudden we hear this kind of crazy commotion, and then all of a sudden, like, Polian looks at his phone and he takes off. And then we're like, what the heck is going on? And then so we all kind of start looking at our phones, and we all realize that Noah Boykin had just committed to Notre Dame, and nobody was expecting it. And there was a couple coaches watching his announcement on TV, and they started going crazy when he picked him because they didn't think he was going to pick him. Nobody from Notre Dame knew he was going to pick Notre Dame. That was the last what the heck moment, that like the most what the heck moment that I could say that I have from Notre Dame recruiting, in my opinion. This is the most recent one. So Rob Osgood with a question. In your opinion, with the recruiting cycle, does Notre Dame start thinking about 3-year players versus 4-year players? I know it depends on the player, but with the higher ranked skill players, it must be a thought. It's always a thought with top players. I mean, look, when Notre Dame's recruiting Keon Keeley, knowing that there's a chance he's a 3-year player, you recruit guys like Dante Moore and I'm trying to think of some of the, Richard Young, if, they're not recruiting him thinking they're going to have him for 4 to 5 years, even guys like Blake Fisher types, when you have these elite top level players, you always think that, hey, this guy could be a 3-year player, and it impacts sort of your recruiting next moving forward. I think they're like that with most players. I think this current staff will be even more so thinking about that because they understand what they're bringing in. And I think that's going to be the key, in my opinion, is being able to handle that. And that's why, Ryan and I have talked about this. We've talked about Notre Dame needing to start thinking about the fact that one or two of the current starting offensive tackles could be 3-year guys and go in that direction. So I think there's a lot of that needs to happen, and even more so moving forward. Okay. Huh. I'm sorry. Vince, I'm not going to do the if we miss out on Dante questions. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, and I'm just not going to go there. I thought this was a better one. This is really good. John Klimek, I love this question. John says you were recruiting 2 quarterbacks. I hope Ryan gets in here before I'm done answering this one, because I really like this one. You're recruiting 2 quarterbacks, Dante Moore and Manti Dore. that are almost identical on the field, both winners and 5 stars. But Manti Dore is left-handed. Would that change a coach's ranking of them? That is a really good question. I would say yes. I think it would. If everything else is equal, I think most coaches would take the right-handed player. I do. Because it's not just play calling that is impacted by the hand of your quarterback, meaning you're going to throw differently to the right than the left. That's just always the case. One is open and just a normal throw. The other is you got to open your hips and you've got to throw the backside. But also the ball spins completely differently from a right-handed quarterback compared to a left-handed quarterback. And so I think that is part of it as well. Is, again, if all things are equal, do I want my receivers having to catch a ball from a right-handed guy where the ball is spinning, this way, and then a left-handed guy where the ball is spinning that way? That can be different. So if all things are equal, I'm taking a right-handed guy, in my opinion, if all things are equal. Now, if the left-handed guy was better, I'd have no problem taking the left-handed guy. None at all. None at all. Okay. Let's see down here. John Murray says, is Ryan Barnes as good as I think he is? I see him as one of the best tacklers and holding much promise as a cover guy. Well, John, I don't necessarily know what you think of John Murray, of Ryan Barnes. But just based on kind of what you said, I don't know about the tackling part. We'll have to see about that. But I think, I think he's, right now, looking at the current roster, one of the 3 to 4 most physically talented guys on the roster at corner, and that includes 2 freshmen. I mean, of the non-freshmen, I think Ryan Barnes is probably my number 2 guy. It just has got a sphere of God-given ability. I think he's long. I think he's intelligent. I think he has really good instincts. The tackling piece was he was a good tackler in high school, but he wasn't like the thumper we saw in the blue gold game. I don't think that's necessarily going to be something that we always see from him. I think he's fluid. I think the only thing he's really lacking is he's not an elite speed guy. He's probably no mid 4 or 5 guy. But, I think he's very good. I do. I think if he wins a starting job, he's going to be a better football player than what's there now. If he doesn't win the starting job, then, it is what it is. But I think Ryan Barnes can be a really, really good football player. There's no question about that. Oh, Patio Furniture says, with the number of schools valuing money over loyalty to our tradition, is it inevitable that the top 32 or so teams band together for their own TV contract and playoff? I don't think schools valuing money over loyalty and tradition is a new thing. I think the difference is now it's just so much more out there and in our face. But schools valuing money over everything else is it's like a thing that's as old as Ryan and I. I mean, it's been going on forever. It's just now it's more out there. So I don't think it'll be the top 32 or so teams. I think it'll end up being at least 50 teams. It'll be most of the Power 5 is who would it be? It would be, and every proposal I've seen there's only 2 proposals I've seen of petite people talking about that. There's the Power 5 plus Notre Dame, and then the other one is just the SEC. The SEC does its own thing and takes a few teams with it. I think I honestly think if we see a break off of from the NCAA, I actually think we'll see a split of college football. And it's just my opinion, Ryan. I don't know what you think about this, but I think we'll see the SEC try to go do their own thing. They're already hinting about it. We'll have our own playoff. Okay, fine, go do that. But here's the thing: if it's just the SEC teams that are there now, that's one thing. But the SEC is going to do that and try to take a bunch of people with them. They've already done with Oklahoma and Texas. They'll try to get Clemson. They'll try to get Florida State. They'll try to get Miami. They'll try to get Notre Dame. They'll try to start taking all those teams with them and make it a giant SEC kind of thing and maybe change the name. But I could also see a scenario in which, a lot of teams say, hey, you want to be that way, you go do your own thing, and the rest of us are going to do our thing. I think that would work if the Big Ten – I think the Big Ten in many ways is going to determine the future of college football moving forward. And the reason I say that is if the Big Ten just becomes the northern version of the SEC, then college football is going to go to a very dark place. If the Big Ten decides, hey, we actually do still care about the mission of being an academic institution while still also valuing the fact that we want to make a lot of money, then we can go about it this way. And if they become the leadership model of college football, along with Notre Dame, compared to right now where the SEC has been dragging college football along for a decade with ESPN. If the Big Ten says F you to ESPN and F you to the SEC, then I think that could get us off the current cliff that we're getting ready to drive over, in my opinion. If they're not willing to do that and they just go for a money grab and go with ESPN as opposed to staying with Fox, because the reason part of that is, Ryan, is that includes, to me, the Big Ten completely leaving ESPN and going to Fox. And then now all of a sudden ESPN has a legitimate competitor, finally, for college sports. Because right now ESPN gets to basically determine what's going on, right? And if there's a legitimate competitor that, I think a lot of people would like to kind of break away from ESPN, but they can't because there's no other option. Like, if you were to take a stance, like, okay, I don't support what ESPN believes in, whether it's their politics, whether it's their money, whatever the case may be, then you have to also tell yourself, I'm going to watch very little sports. Very little sports. I can watch Notre Dame, the occasional game on Fox, and tennis, and some race, some NASCAR, and that's it. No NBA. Right? No college, almost very little college sports, the Big Ten network here and there, but you can't watch college sports anymore. I would love it if a competitor was able to rise up to start taking more of that away from ESPN, because I think ESPN would die a quick death if, like, the only thing keeping ESPN alive right now is it has all the games. I mean, so much of ESPN is a terrible business model. It's just, but they make all their money from games. And so I would like to see them lose some of that, and then maybe they would stop being such giant D-bags about what they're doing to the game. So, and the Big Ten is the only conference that wields big enough stick to stop letting the SEC boss everyone around and tell everybody else what to do. So that's my long rant on that. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, Ryan.
I mean, I'm all for sticking it back to the SEC in ESPN. So I'll keep it nice and short, and hopefully, I don't know if you noticed, Brian, I don't have a hat on anymore. It's because
did you just chuck it out the window?
So
okay,
yeah. Well, it's on the other side of the room. It's too nice of a hat to do that to it. But yeah, it flew across the room though. So
yeah, I can imagine. I'm sorry for your frustration. We'll get it fixed here. We'll get it figured out at some point in time. We will. I'm sure we will. Let's get down to some more questions here, Ryan. Did you hear the one about the Dante Moore versus Manti Dore?
Yeah. I heard it.
The question was basically, you have two elite quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same skill set, same ranking, same leadership, same winners. One's right-handed, one's left-handed.
Right-handed. Defer. Yeah. It's a tiebreaker. It's like if you're evaluating a position and they have an equal grade, but you can take the bigger guy, you're going to take the bigger guy. It's a big man's game, right? And I've coached lefties before in both football and track, and I hate it. It's everything's backwards, and it's then your most important offensive tackle is now going to play right tackle instead of left tackle. It's just going to change everything. So it's weird.
What's interesting is I actually think it's a little easier to coach a left-handed quarterback from a fundamental standpoint. Everything about like running an offense is different, but just teaching the technique, because what you can do with a left-handed quarterback is he can actually face you and mirror you. And what a lot of coaches try to do is they try to stand in a different direction where he's got, like with a right-handed quarterback, if I'm facing you, you got to I'm throwing this way and you're throwing that way for trying to mirror. But if I'm throwing the left-handed quarterback and he's facing me as we're doing this, he's mirroring me. Right. So only there, everything else is different and I hate it. But that is an interesting aspect of that.
I coached a left-handed discus thrower before, and it was the worst time I've ever had coaching in my life. Oh man, not too much fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, but see, that's the thing is what I mentioned was once you get into the actual execution of it, I don't like it because the ball spins differently and the play calling is basically a lot of times backwards, and it's a weird situation. John A1 is getting a lot of love in the chat for all his great questions, and I like this response from him because I'm just trying to get Brian, Vince, and Ryan to a 4-hour show. I could cheat and start asking about American war history or Thomas Sowell economic discussions, but that would be cheating. Yes, that would be cheating. And it would also mean we would lose a lot of people because I think me and you, John, are probably about the only people that would sit and listen to a 4-hour conversation about American war history or Thomas Sowell economic discussion. So, yeah, I think that would make for a 4-hour show, but we wouldn't make a lot of money. And there wouldn't be a lot of people listening, in my opinion. Ian Johnson asks, which team, not Notre Dame, is closest to reaching that top championship tier of schools like Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson? Are reaching teams able to sustain or be a one-time thing like LSU? Well, LSU technically wasn't a one-time thing. I mean, LSU won in 19, but they also won in, what was it, 07? What year did they won? They won in 07, right? They played for it in 11. They also won in 04. So, they've won 3 titles in 16-year span, right? 2004 to 19, because Saban won it in 04, beat Oklahoma, and then Les Miles won it in 07. They beat Ohio State, and then 2019. So I wouldn't call them like a one-time. Like to me, there's that one time, and then there's like Florida State who wins a title like one every 20 years, right? So yeah, that's an interesting one. So who would be the team that's not Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, or Clemson? That's closest, and also not Notre Dame? That's a really interesting question. Yep. Let me think about that one for a second, because you took out my first choice was going to be Notre Dame, and not even as a Notre Dame fan. I mean, look, they've been in the playoff multiple times. They've had top ranked. They had a number 6 recruiting class last year. They got the number 1 recruiting class this year. That's a good one. If Mario Cristobal would have stayed at Oregon, I would have considered putting Oregon in there. My reasoning would have been, I think he's recruiting well, he's a good coach, and the Pac-12 stinks. And, they could get to the playoff kind of unharmed, much like Clemson, fresher, deeper, and maybe get a chance to make a run. They would probably be my next choice. There's not a Big Ten team, I think, that I'd put in there, Ryan. I don't know if you would. I'm not putting A&M in there. I think Jimbo Fisher's an incredibly overrated coach. And as I've said before, their recruiting class, as great as it was had some holes, and they haven't strung together the recruiting classes that I like. Trying to think, honestly,
you mentioned Mario Cristobal. I might throw Miami in there, not for what they've done over the last couple of years, but just for the trajectory of their program, possibly.
I think there's a lot of things in place at Miami that could help them get there, Ryan. Obviously, talent in South Florida, the tradition, the conference is weak, which is a key, in my opinion, for a non-SEC team, is like, can you to quickly rise? My thing is I still need to see if the school is going to support football. That's my only holdup. I think you and I would probably agree on, I think Mario's a really good coach, not a great coach, but he's a really good coach. I think he'll recruit really well to Miami, especially if they go out and have a 9-win season this year. I think it would really help jump the recruiting up. It just goes down to, but will the school support football enough to really take it to the next level? That'd be my big question mark. But if they are, then I think Miami could be one. I do. They'd be behind Notre Dame for me.
Yeah,
But-
it's just like a school that's cool, right? I mean,
Right.
it wouldn't take it wouldn't take recruits too long to get on board with Miami
Right.
if they look like they're relevant again, right? Because
And the state of
like
Miami is
cool.
still a thing, Ryan. That's like they
Exactly.
don't use that expression anymore, but it's still a thing. Don't be surprised if Mario brings that back. And the state of Miami, for those that don't remember, like basically, what was it like? One of the highways in like Central Florida on down, they basically call it the state of Miami, meaning like that's our home state. We don't lose a single kid from there, kind of thing, right? And that's still a thing. Now, I think it's a little harder to dominate the state of Miami than it used to be because kids are more willing to leave. You know, the world's been opened up a little bit. But if Miami's good, still a lot of those kids are going to want to go there. But the counter to that is Miami can also recruit more nationally now than they did back in the 80s. You know, because they can go get a California kid if they need to, if they lose their stud running back from there. They can go out to Texas and get a kid or whatever the case may be. So I think that's a trade-off to the point where it doesn't hurt them that they lose some of those state of Miami kids. So I think if the schools want to support it, then yeah, I think they could have a shot behind Notre Dame and obviously those other schools. I don't think Florida State actually is in a position like Miami. I think Florida State was great because of Bobby Bowden. I don't think Florida State has a lot of built-in inherent strengths that if the right coach is hired, they're going to be right back on top. I think Florida State can get back to being really good, but I don't think they can get back to being what they were under Bobby Bowden. I think they were that because of Bobby Bowden. And I think if all three of the Florida schools are equal, it used to be Miami, Florida State, Florida. I think in today's era, it would be Miami, Florida, Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be the order of it, just because Tallahassee's not a great place to live. The school's not very good. It's way out in the panhandle. So it's a ways away from the rest of Florida. It's not as easy to recruit in-state kids there as it is, you know, when you're Gainesville, right in the center of the state, or Miami. And it's a little, to me, it's a little tougher. And they've never had great financial support ever. And so that's obviously an issue too. Texas is one. I think if Texas hires the right coach, they could quickly get back on track. I think that's probably another one, but I wouldn't call them closest now because they have a lot to prove, but it wouldn't take Texas very long. And I mean, it could 2 to 3 years. If Sarkisian is a legit coach, they're going to go out there and win 9-10 games this year. They had a top 5 recruiting class last year coming off of a losing record, right? I mean, imagine what they're going to do this year if they go out and win 9-10 games. I think Texas I would probably put Texas as the next best shot. I don't think anyone's close, not named those 4 schools in Notre Dame. I don't think any of them are close. LSU is like, I've never seen a program fall harder than what LSU did in a 2-year stretch. They went from having one of the best teams I've ever seen to hot garbage in 2 years. Just the talent level is completely different. You know, so I don't think that's an easy turnaround, and I don't think Brian Kelly's the guy to do it. So I don't know if there is another school, Ryan, that I would say is close. I think your Miami point and my Texas point are about, well, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Oklahoma. Because you're talking about close. Here's the deal. Whatever you think of the new coaching staff, right? Take that aside. Other than Notre Dame, what program has had the same level of success the last 5 years, recruiting it on the field, than Oklahoma? There isn't anybody. And Notre Dame's the only one. So I think you and I both have our doubts about Brent Venables as a head coach. Is that kind of why you were shaking your head? If we are wrong, because you and I agree on that, if we're wrong, though, and let's say he is a better coach than we think, Oklahoma's not very far off. I mean, now, I think going to the SEC is going to kill them. And that's where they're going to – that's the bigger hang-up for me than Brent Venables. But I like the Jeff Lebby hire, keeping Bedenbaugh there. I think Oklahoma would probably be the closest right now to reaching the top championship tier of schools. The issue that I would have with Oklahoma, Ryan, is the second part of the question. And that is, are they able to sustain it, or would it be a one-time thing? I think Oklahoma could sneak a title in the next couple of years if they can get a quarterback that can do that, right? But it's not sustainable because they're going to the SEC, and it'll hurt them a lot more than it's going to hurt Texas, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but that would
I
be my
would.
stance.
This is like a sleeper article to me, right? Like I don't think there's
Mhm.
anybody close to your point. I think it's like let's take maybe you buy into Miami moving forward with the new regime. Maybe you buy into maybe the Florida Gators with the new regime
USC.
if Napier hits. Maybe USC if Lincoln Riley gets everything working over there. Those are kind of the teams, but they're also substantial brands already, right? Like I don't think anybody's coming out of the woodworks to be Clemson all of a sudden, you know.
And I don't think USC's close. I know everybody's hyping it up, but USC's a hot mess. I mean, that's not a good roster, even with the additions. Like, oh, look at the receivers they're going to have. Hey, y'all, they've had some really good, really, really good receiving cores for crap teams in the last 15 years. All right. So it's going to take a lot more than just, oh, they have a quarterback and receivers. Oh, USC has a quarterback and really good skill players. Oh, gee, when has that ever happened before? You know, I mean, other than the last 40 years.
Someone said in the chat one that's interesting. It's obviously not it's not a now one, but maybe in the future if the right coach is hired, Nebraska maybe like could back
not in the Big Ten.
No, I don't think so.
No, I think the Big Ten is there's going to be a peak for Nebraska. I don't think they could ever be better than what Wisconsin was in their heyday with Alvarez and then Bielema. I don't see them ever being better than Ohio State. They don't fit the Big Ten. I think they hurt their recruiting base. You know, they can't go down into Texas like they used to and get top players like they were when they were playing a Big 8 schedule. I think the conference has hurt them, and I think that now we're going to have a show this summer, and I've hinted this a lot, and it's going to be fun. But like, which programs need to get good? If college football was to reach its peak of greatness, what would it look like? And I do think Nebraska being good again is good for college football. But as far as Nebraska getting back to when it was a great program, I think the other thing that's hurt Nebraska too is junior college doesn't produce the players that it used to produce. You don't see as many JUCO kids nowadays as you used to, like that are really impactful players. I mean, there used to be a lot of JUCOs that would go to Nebraska. And remember Terrence Marshall, that linebacker they had on those great 90s teams. Like they had several, it wasn't a lot, but you were getting some JUCO kids. And I just don't see that, you know, going down to Texas and out to California the way that I mean, how many kids in California are like, I want to play in the Big Ten? And if they are, they're going to go to Ohio State or Michigan, not Nebraska. And that's the difference. So I think that greedy money move killed that program, killed the Big 12. So Nebraska's just killing themselves and then and then they're treated like crap. So the Big Ten treats them like a redheaded stepchild. You know, so it's like, okay, but that's what you get. I have no sympathy for you because you did that to yourself when you just did a greedy money move and ran to the Big Ten. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for you. So sorry. Don't feel bad.
Last one I would throw out there is Tennessee. I'm interested in them. I'm interested in them.
Yeah, that's a good one because I think the East is more there. You can rise up the East a lot faster than you can the West of the SEC. I think that's a really good one, Ryan. And what they have shown in this modern era of NIL, they have big money people willing to hand out big bucks. And the best way for an SEC team to get to that level is to pay. It's like with a lot of schools, you need the right coach. I mean, that's true of Alabama too. I mean, Alabama's had some coaches that didn't win. It's not like Nick Saban's just doing what every other Alabama coach did. That's not the case. But yeah, that's a good one. I didn't even think about Tennessee. That's a really good one.
Because I'm not sure if Josh Heupel is like the guy, right? But I did watch a little bit of their film recently, and he's a pretty good offensive mind, man.
Yeah.
He's pretty good.
My question is, can he put a staff together, especially on defense? But yeah, he's that offense was really good this year. He was really aggressive. He didn't fall into the trap that a lot of people do when they go to the SEC. Is like, I've got to adapt what I do to the SEC. No, he said, this is what I do. You hired me to do this. I'm going to do this. And it worked. I mean, I don't think people realize how bad their offense was the year before he got there. I mean, Ryan, it was bad.
They were still trying out Jared Guarantano or whatever his name was. They were still trotting him out. And then they made Hendon Hooker look like a completely different player. So,
yeah. And as long as he can recruit and put together good staffs, yes, I think that could end up being that's a really interesting one I didn't think of, Ryan, but that's a good one. Because Tennessee can recruit. And here's the other thing. I think this is also going to hurt Nebraska. I think you have to be at a school that has a really, really good talent base close by or in your state. And that's what hurts Nebraska. Nebraska's got a lead. Like Oklahoma doesn't have great talent, but there's enough. There's Micah Teases, but they literally border on Texas. Like it's like from a recruiting standpoint, it's like the northern part of Texas from a recruiting standpoint. Nebraska's in the different. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. With Tennessee, you're kind of right in the middle of everything, meaning at Tennessee, you're not that far from Cincinnati. It's like a 5.5, 6 hour drive from northern Indiana to Nashville. I mean, it's not that you can go recruit Indianapolis just as effectively as you can go down to New Orleans or Florida, and you can go up to Ohio. I mean, when Tennessee was rolling, do you remember back in the day when they got Ben Wilson and from Cincinnati, Notre Dame really wanted? It was during the Charlie era, really good DN. If Tennessee is rolling, Notre Dame may not get Prince Colley, right? I mean, that's the reality of it because Tennessee does produce good talent. Tennessee doesn't be able to keep it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they're a decent academic institution, right? Like they're not
decent,
bad.
Yeah, no, they're not terrible at all.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
And they border Virginia, right? Like they border they on the eastern part of the state. They border the state of Virginia. So I mean, think about that. They're they either touch or are a state away from Ohio, Virginia, Indiana, and then of course all like Georgia. I mean, they're kind of right in the middle of that really unique place that I do believe. I think you're right, and they have a very loyal fan base. That's a good one, Ryan. I didn't think about that one.
And you got the nightlife in Nashville too, right? I mean, that's a big sell too. I mean,
right,
yeah.
exactly. So yeah, and Knoxville's not too far away from Nashville. So yes, and I've heard Knoxville. I've never been, but I've heard Knoxville's a really cool college town. I don't know that for a fact. I've never been, but I know some buddies of mine that are from Tennessee that say Tennessee's is a pretty cool place. So it's a very interesting one, Ryan. And as I'm trying to rack my brain for other programs, Tennessee did not pop in my head. I think that's a really good one. Really good one. Who would be your number 2 choice in the Big Ten? I still think it's Michigan if they had the right situation. I just don't think Jim Harbaugh's that guy.
Yeah, mine would probably be Michigan too. I don't think Michigan State would have stay power, right? Like they said, random year. I mean, maybe if they get a D'Antonio swing again and he has like the random year where they're good and then the random couple years where they're not good. But yeah, I think Michigan, again, it's a brand. So
I'm going to change it. I'm going to go Penn State. Because I think with the right coach, now it's not with James Franklin. I'm looking at it as a program. If the right coach got hired, and this is why Penn State's not an answer to this question, because they're not close, because I don't think I don't think he's the guy. But if I'm wrong about James Franklin, this is kind of my point about Brent Venables. If I'm wrong about James Franklin or Penn State hires someone different or better, because the reason I initially didn't go with them is because Pennsylvania doesn't recruit players like it used to. It doesn't produce talent in football like it used to. But it still produces good talent. And if Penn State was really rolling, they don't lose Rodney Gallagher to West Virginia or Notre Dame. They keep all those guys in state. They keep some of the Pittsburgh guys there, not a ton. Penn State's never cleaned up in Pittsburgh, even when they were great. I mean, they either went to Pitt or they went to Notre Dame or Ohio State. I mean, Penn State's kind of far away from Pittsburgh, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. But they recruit Jersey like crazy. They recruit Virginia like crazy. They clean up in Maryland if they were really rocking and rolling. So I think maybe Penn State. And it might be the other one along with Michigan, because for whatever reason, Michigan kids don't have that same affinity for the in-state that they used to. It's been like that for a while. Makes it very interesting.
Let's go with Rutgers next too, right? Clean up in Jersey, keep all the talent in Jersey.
No. Siggy 13, Brian, Vincent, Ryan. I really like Julian saying. I've noticed you guys saying more positives about CJ Carr. What are the key differences in terms of elite level you see between the two on film? Let you take first crack at that, Ryan. Both of us like Julian Sand. I just want to say we like Julian Sand. It's not like we dislike him. Mm-hmm. I would even argue he might be a better high school player right now than CJ Carr.
That's fair.
I mean, he's a gunslinger. It's just we're projecting, and that's where the difference comes from. But please answer the question.
Yeah, I think Julian, he has a little bit of a stronger arm for me, but I think that the reason that I kind of like CJ a little bit more right now is I think he just has a more natural feel for the position. I think he's a little more accurate, and I think he's a little bit better of an athlete. I think he's there's just a natural feel. I mean, it's like the Dante Moore thing that we always talk about, right? Like there's a couple quarterbacks in the 2023 class that may have stronger arms or maybe even a little bit better athleticism, but it's just the feel for the quarterback position, right? And I think that CJ's a little advanced in that regard. But I mean, that to say, they're both top 50 caliber players, in my opinion, right? Like Julian Sain has big upside. Like there's no doubt, but I don't know. There's something about CJ that I think is just a little different that you can't quite quantify with arm strength, to be honest with you.
I think it's a combination of just more of a natural pocket passer. I think, look, and here's another thing too, Ryan, and to Siggy's question, a lot of it's going to be about what your personal preference is for style of play. I mean, if you're someone who is, and also what's the offense you run, it's going to change the answer. If you are Ohio State or Notre Dame, you're going to want a quarterback that's more of a, he needs to be able to drop back and throw it. There's other programs where, like Julian Sain, I think would be a great fit in Clemson's offense. He'd be a great fit in some of, he would not be a great fit at he'd be a great fit in Ole Miss's offense. Like I think he would put up big time numbers for Lane Kiffin, who likes to have a mobile quarterback, as well as a guy that can sit in the pocket and throw. He would have been great in like that old Texas A&M offense back in the day with Johnny Manziel. Like he's a better passing version of him in some regards and how he plays. Now he's not the idiot that Johnny Manziel was, but you get the point style of play wise. So there's some offenses where he's better. For me, when it comes to CJ Carr and Julian Sain, it's also projecting who's it's more about the fit at Notre Dame. I think Tom Rees ideally wants a guy that's going to sit back and throw it, not a guy that's going to run around all the time. And I think that's why I like Tyler Buckner, because I think Tyler Buckner, when he runs, he's running. When he throws, he can sit in the pocket and throw it. Julian is more of a gunslinger than he is a traditional pocket quarterback for me, where CJ can move, but he's more of a pocket quarterback for me. So a lot of it's going to be about personal preference, and you're going to find other people that are going to like Julian Sain more. And I wouldn't sit here and say, you're nuts. You're so wrong. You're way off base. No, I'm not going to say that, because, again, it just depends on what's your preference and what is it that you're looking for in a quarterback. And that's going to be depending on the offense you want to run, you may think Josh Allen's a better quarterback than Pat Mahomes. And in another offense that you want to run, you're going to want, like if you're looking at Ryan, you're a Rams fan. If you're a Rams fan, you probably would take Pat Mahomes over Josh Allen. But in other offenses where, maybe you don't have the players around them, or it's more built around the quarterback making more plays, maybe you might want Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or whatever. I mean, that's all part of it as well. Is it's who's the better fit for your offense and what you're looking for in a quarterback, in my opinion. So good question. Good question. Colin McGee says, do you guys see Notre Dame maintaining the 23 class and momentum with the 24 class if Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame have a subpar season in 2022? Say Notre Dame has an 8-win season this year. Would it be more difficult to recruit than before?
I mean, it'll stall momentum a little bit. I don't think that it's one thing where if they don't have the greatest season that it will completely kill momentum, but it'll be more difficult to get kids to buy in if there's not on-field results, right? I mean, again, I think it's just a halt in momentum, not as a kill of momentum, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it'll be a little tougher to put that class together, but it wouldn't be impossible. I still think they'd have a top 5 to 8 class. I think whether or not you can get a top 3 class again, it won't be tougher than before, because before you didn't put in the work. So it kind of balances itself out. You never took advantage of the success you had on the trail, or on the field, on the trail. Right. So it'll be harder than what you're doing right now, because right now there's still the unknown. He doesn't have, I don't think most kids care about the loss to Oklahoma State. Didn't have the staff. He, didn't have his staff, coach being fired, all that stuff. So I think 8-4 would be a very disappointing season, though. It would. It'd be a very disappointing season. I just don't see it. I know I'm probably in the minority here, but I just don't see it. I really don't see it.
I don't think you're in the minority. I think if anything, 8-4 expectations are in the minority. So.
Yep. Ray Panconi. Anyone here when Freeling will commit?
It stayed the same, Ray. It's going to be into the season most likely, unless something gets escalated, which it's always possible. But Monroe has been very consistent all the way through the recruiting process so far that he's going to take his time, he's going to take his official visits, and he's going to make his decisions. So it's not going to be a rushed one. But I mean, if he takes a visit and it escalates it, it's always possible, but you should expect it most likely to go into the season, barring something else happens.
John DeCrisio, was the loss of Rodney Gallagher strictly a proximity to home issue?
Not strictly.
Fully. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
No, not strictly. I mean, there's a relationship with West Virginia outside of just the coaches. We'll leave it at that. If you want to get on the board and find the full info on that, you can. But I mean, there's definitely some proximity part of it, I would say. I mean, Rodney loves where he grows up. He loves where he lives. And I mean, I think one of the things he said was he wanted to, give back to where he was grown up or whatever. So it definitely has a part in it, John, but it is not the full story now.
Yep. Mason Sidwell with a super chat. Thank you, Mason. What made Brian Van Gorder so bad? Serious question. It's a fair question. Beyond just the fact he was a pretty horrible human being who just wasn't liked or respected by his coaches or teammates, which is, that's a very important thing. If you don't like your coach or respect your coach, it's going to be a problem. I think strictly from a football standpoint, let's just focus on that, Ryan. He was trying to run a defense I don't think he actually understood. I think he was trying to run a defense that he got from someone else that he didn't understand how to make it work. And here's what that means. If I'm going to I'm an offensive coach. If I'm going to install an offense, I've got to know the ins and outs of every aspect of that offense because I got to know how to adapt it to my personnel. I've got to know how to properly use it to put a game plan together when I'm getting ready to play a team. If the more you know something, the greater feel you're going to have for what to call and when against what looks. It's easier to adjust when you have a full knowledge of your offense. It's like with anything, man. That's my thing. I just know it. But it's kind of like taking a test when you basically just tried to memorize everything the night before. And if you think you know all the answers and the answers just kind of play out perfectly, you're going to be fine. But what if the teacher throws in some curveballs? Or if you think it's going to be this is a better example. You study all night for a test and you haven't spent the semester learning it. You don't really know the material, but you just memorized a bunch of stuff because you think it's going to be multiple choice like every other test was that semester. But the teacher throws you off and says, okay, it's not multiple choice. It's all short answer and essay. Multiple choice you can get right with memorization. You can put things together like, okay, this associates with this, multiple choice. Or there's a process of elimination. You got 4 options. If it's short answer or essay, you don't know it, you have 0 chance of getting it right because you don't know it. It has to come from your mind. You have to know the information to be able to verbalize it, right? Same thing in football, right? If you are just kind of trying to run somebody else's defense that you don't understand, you're not going to know how to adjust in game. You're not going to be able to, your players aren't going to be as confident and know how to do everything. That's number one. Number two, because he didn't necessarily know how to teach the defense, he felt that he had to have the right call for every scenario as opposed to just little quick checks. And so and this is something I was told by another coach that played against Notre Dame at the time. So you could just simply do something as simple as taking your slot and motion them across the field, and Notre Dame would have to check everything. That's absurd. Like and then if you snap the ball as soon as the guy goes across, they're in mid-check. And we saw that a ton of times. So it was just a far too complex system. And the fact that he didn't understand that complex system the way that you should when it's your system meant that he couldn't teach it. Because if you don't, Ryan, you're a teacher, right? Yeah. If you don't know the subject matter, you're not going to be as good of a teacher as someone who knows the subject matter, right? And that's just a fact. You can't teach it because you may be able to regurgitate what was given in the lesson plan or manual, but if you start getting into questions and kids are asking you questions about it or something along those lines, then you're just not going to be as effective as someone who really knows the material, correct? And that's who Brian Van Gorder was, in my opinion.
That's crazy. Wait, so if there was a motion, then Brian, he didn't have an adjustment off of the look, right?
No, it wasn't like
something different.
Yeah, it wasn't like different. Just completely different. It wasn't like, okay, So like if we're in a 2-look, right, we have a call to our safety to the strong side and then the backside safety. So like maybe you're going to just roll your safety down, right? They motion across, you just check that and just, do it this
rotate,
way, right?
You're right.
Or you may change your run strength. It may change your run strength, right? Because you have to identify run strength. No, it'd be a complete audible, and there's audibles happening at all 3 levels, right? The line's doing things, the linebackers are doing things, and the DBs are doing things, often independent of each other. And it just was a freaking hot mess. And then, of course, for people that were at our most tailgate, there was, of course, the Bible, which is more of a, you have to be at a tailgate to know that story. But yeah, he just didn't know the intel. He didn't know the defense. He didn't know how to teach it. It was way too complex. He didn't know how to adjust it. And then on top of that, he was a bad guy. And so all those things factored together to make him a bad football coach. Tyler Benge, Brian and Ryan, how is the summer evaluation camp, and does the school pay for the players to visit? Is that sort of a recruiting tool too? No, they do not pay for that, because you cannot take an official visit for a camp. So for example, if Joe Otting was coming on campus the weekend of the camp for an official visit, he could not work out at the camp. If you're going to come to the camp, it's got to be an unofficial visit. And then you can come back the next week for an official visit. But the school, and here's the thing, you can't pay for him to come in town, then be part of the camp, but not start the official visit and then stay for that. If you're going to fly him in town for the official visit, at no point in time, since he's in town, can you have him be part of that workout. So it has to be an unofficial visit.
And you're not evaluating a player that you want to get on an official, right? Like that's kind of like you're trying to close the deal out at that point, right? So that's why it's separated. Evaluation and official are just not the same wavelength.
Right. You do that part. If you're trying to size a kid up, you're doing that during the unofficial part of it, or the in-school visit, things like that. Is it a recruiting tool too? Yes, it is a recruiting tool though, especially for underclassmen. Like there was a lot of kids like Peyton Bowen worked out at Notre Dame last year. Don Schuler worked out at Notre Dame last year. That was part of the evaluation, was getting to work with Coach O'Leary and getting to see him in action, and those type of things are things that these kids liked, and it was beneficial to them.
Yeah, we talked about that with the interview with Don Schuler, Don's father. He talked about that they didn't really start heating up until they saw him in person, and they saw that
he blew him away.
That he was. Exactly.
Yeah, he was a kid they liked, but they weren't sure of, because of exactly what we said, or what I said. I don't know if his sophomore film was really good from the standpoint of he was a really smart, instinctive football player, but I didn't see a great athlete. His athleticism. So I was told that he blew the staff away at the camp, and I'm like, and that's why they took him. I'm like, okay, we'll see, because the film didn't show great athlete. Of course, he goes out as a junior, and now you're seeing that athleticism pop, and now you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. But that started to show in the summer. And that's what really, and same thing with Peyton Bowen. Like the staff really liked Peyton Bowen, but it wasn't until he ran a 4.4, and then they said, hold on a second, 4.41, that doesn't seem right. So they made him run it again, and they timed him a 4.38. I've told that story too. That's when all of a sudden, okay, this kid we really liked now becomes a must get for us. And that's what really, really kind of blew them away. There's no doubt about it. All right, here's from Ian Johnson with a super chat. Thank you. Who, not Notre Dame, is actually we saw this one. Okay, we asked that one before, so apparently he put that as a super chat as well. So thank you for that. Ladarius Martin, our resident Alabama fan, says, "What do y'all think about Eli Holstein to Alabama?" He is obviously the quarterback that just picked Alabama. So Ryan, have you had a chance to watch much of Eli Holstein?
I have, yeah. I watched Eli. I hadn't watched him until recently because he obviously wasn't on Notre Dame's board at all. Kid's good, Ladarius. I mean, very honestly, man, he's gifted pocket passer. I think he understands the game really well. There's big time tools there, man. He's a big kid too. He's like 6'4", 220 something already. Like he's very gifted. There's no doubt about it. Alabama got a good one there.
Yeah, strong arm, clean release. He's a better vertical athlete than he is necessarily mobile, because some of his pocket movements are looks a little stiff, and then you see him take off running. I think it's more of a footwork issue. He seems to be really heavy-footed in the pocket. I think that's something you can coach out. Once that gets coached out, I think that improves. The only thing that I'm concerned about with him, which is he doesn't look super avoid the pressure kind of guy. But once he gets in space, he can really run.
He's not springy.
And he's got some good athletic numbers. So I really think it comes down to a coaching thing, like a technique thing. But I mean, he's in the conversation for me of that fifth quarterback in the top 5. I mean, so like Dante Moore's my number 1, Malachi's probably my number 2, Arch is in my top 5. After those 3, it's kind of like, okay, there's Jaden Rashada.
I like Rashada. By the way,
he's in my top
like
5.
Rashada.
There's Eli Holstein. There's obviously Nico's a guy that a lot of people have in there, and then there's other guys like I'm a big Ricky Collins fan. He's not my top 5, but like he's a sleeper quarterback that I really like. This is an incredibly deep quarterback class, but Eli is in that conversation for that 5 spot. I'd probably put Jaden Rashada number 4 right now. But again, I'd have to dive really deeper into the film to say that definitively. It's more off of my gut. Like I like Jaden Rashada more, just get that sense of him. But Eli's in that conversation for me, Ryan. And if you're in the conversation for being one of the 5 best quarterbacks in this quarterback class, you're really good. And I think Eli is really good.
Agreed.
So, yeah, it's a really good pickup for Alabama. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Another super chat from Sky Shark 425. Thank you for that. Military history live stream. I'm in. Tell me your thoughts on Jamini. I don't know what that means.
I think it's a person. I think someone commented a full name.
Yeah.
I don't know who he is either, though.
I don't know who that is. So I guess I'm not the historian that I thought I was. Rob Lobo, who's more likely to play at an elite level this year, the offense or the defense?
I'd say defense is the more likely bets, but I mean, I can get that. You can convince me of either one, but I think judging what I saw last year with defense, with everything that's coming back with guys like Isaiah Foskey and Cam Hart and Jason Adamalola and Maris Loifau coming back from injury and Brandon Joseph getting put into the back end for the defense, I think I could just get there easier with the defensive side of the football.
I think most likely to play at an elite level would be the defense for the reasons you mentioned. I think the unit with the greatest upside is the offense. I think Ryan is absolutely correct. The defense getting to where they are to an elite level is not a big leap. It's just not. The talent's there, the experience, and they've proven it. The offense is a long way away from being elite. But I would argue that the overall talent and big-time playmaking ability on offense is greater. They got a lot more to prove for me. So that's why I agree with Ryan's answer that it's the defense. But I did want to kind of throw that caveat in because I do feel like if the offense gets kind of close to its potential, it has a chance to be really, 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 really good. There's no doubt about it. Let's get to some more. Adam Shipley, as an analyst, what will Laurinaitis' role consist of? So actually, I was surprised by this. He's not an analyst. He's a graduate assistant, which is even better for Notre Dame because he can coach. The thing is, as an analyst, he couldn't be on the field. But as a GA, it has to be based on when you stop playing in the – like if you're an NFL player, because there's like a 7-year mark. You can't coach. I think it's like 7 years after you're done. He must not have graduated till late, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe they if you play in the NFL, you shouldn't get punished for playing the NFL if you want to get into coaching. There's got to be some sort of caveats there. But he's listed as a graduate assistant, which means he can coach. My understanding is that Al Golden is allowing him to do a lot of the coaching, or at least some of the coaching at linebacker, which because we've heard reports. I think, Ryan, you even said this at the practice you were at. Didn't you say that there was a time when Al Washington was working with the D tackles and Al Golden took the D ends?
Yeah,
and James Laurinaitis was working with the linebackers. So having if he's the coach that people think he is, and again, the guy played in the NFL for like a decade. It's just like with Chancey Stuckey. Like he knows the game. Right. I mean, it's not like he hasn't been around football for a long time. He stopped playing in like 07 or something or 08 and he hadn't been around football since then. Like this guy's been in football for a long time. So I think he can coach it. And I think it just gives them it's basically like a full-time assistant in a GA role. And of course you have Marcus Freeman, who knows a thing or two about coaching linebackers as well, which helps.
You want to talk about recruiting prowess for a second? Imagine talking James Laurinaitis to come back and be a graduate assistant after being the Rams' all-time leading tackler. Imagine that.
That shows a lot about the respect and the friendship that James Laurinaitis has with Marcus Freeman. It says a lot about them. There's no question. But yes, that is quite the coup. Come be a coach. You're living this nice life. You got your podcast. You're in retirement. Yeah, come be a college football coach. And all that entails. Yeah. Rob Thidoff with a great question. I like this one, Ryan. Says, Brian and Vince, and if Ryan joins later, well done, Rob. In your opinion, what is the most pivotal win for Notre Dame in the past 10 years? And what is the most devastating loss in the past 10 years? I think that is the latter is easier for me than the former.
Is it?
Because I have two. My first gut reaction is Stanford 2012. I think that was a huge win for Notre Dame because I don't think they play for the title. Stanford had dominated them. They won like 4 years in a row. The previous few games hadn't even been competitive. And Stanford was a top 5 caliber program then. I mean, they were coming off a year. They had just lost the Fiesta Bowl game to Oklahoma State in one of the best bowl games I've ever seen the year before. They were replacing Andrew Luck, but they were still a really good football team. And I think they finished in the top 10 that year. That game gave Notre Dame the confidence that it needed to run the table and beat Oklahoma. Because like people say Oklahoma, but Oklahoma doesn't happen if they don't beat Stanford first. I just don't believe it. But then kind of the other part of me wants to say Michigan 2018. Because we forget, Notre Dame was coming off of a 10-3 year. They faded down the stretch in 2017, as good as they were. That Michigan game beating a preseason top 10 Michigan team really sparked them to kind of have that undefeated season. I think that 2018 season is the one that really put Notre Dame on its current trajectory of really being a dominant team. So I think Michigan is another one that I really think about.
What about that USC game? Was that 2018?
2017.
2017 USC game. Yeah.
I would say no, because that was my favorite win. But to me, it's not pivotal because of my answer to the latter, which is the most devastating loss in the past 10 years is the Miami game in 2017. Just fair. Like, I still feel like that Notre Dame team could have competed for a championship that year. That was not a great year of college football. That Alabama 2017 team was not that good compared to other Bama teams. I mean, Notre Dame almost beat Georgia in game 2 of the Chip Long, Mike Elko, Matt Balis tenure. And they didn't even play well. And that's the thing, is like they almost beat Georgia and didn't even play well. Like if they would have played against Georgia like they played from second half of BC to Wake Forest, they win that game by 10. And so, and you can say that was first game for Jake Fromm, and that's a fair response. But I don't think Jake Fromm was that much better later in the year, because you could also argue Notre Dame didn't know what a Jake Fromm-led offense was going to look like.
True.
But I felt that team with that offensive line and the defense was good enough that I think it could have been very interesting to see what happened in the playoff. As long as they didn't get Oklahoma in the opener, that was the only team that year that concerned me from a matchup standpoint, because they could score. But Georgia and Alabama and Notre Dame would have pounded Clemson in 2017. Like if they played like they did in that stretch. The Miami game just destroyed that football team. They were never the same team after that. And it shouldn't have happened. It wasn't just the loss, Ryan. It was the way they lost. Just embarrassed. That was to me the most devastating loss of the last 10 years. Like I thought about Stanford 2015, but that wasn't a devastating loss because it didn't have that same effect. But I really feel like the Miami game in 2017 was just
Miami's an easy one. Yeah, that was a difficult one. I want to piggyback off of the positive side, the pivotal one for a second, the 2012 Stanford. I mean, I still have the Stephon Taylor getting stopped at the goal line etched in my mind. Like that's one of the memories that just comes back to me so quickly. So that's one that you'll remember forever, and that's one that I remember forever.
Like, do they go 12-0 if they lose to Stanford? I mean, obviously no. My thing is, do they even go 10-2? If they lose, because I think if they lose to Stanford, it's a snowball, because of what happened the previous 2 years. They lose to Oklahoma. Maybe they lose to USC. I mean, I just don't know if that team would have had the same confidence that it did when they actually beat that. A good Stanford team. Because it came to find out Michigan wasn't that good that year. They beat Michigan State, who was ranked in the top 10. They ended up being like 7-6. They weren't that good. Stanford actually ended up ranked higher at the end of the year than they were when they played. And so that was a really, really good Stanford team. Really good Stanford team. So it's a really good question, Rob. I liked that one. Douglas Road Roundabouts. Would this year's starting O-line look different if Blake Fisher wasn't hurt against Florida State last year? I think so.
Yeah, but I mean, sure. Yeah.
It would look different because I think you'd have a harder, this is my opinion, Ryan. You tell me if you agree or disagree. I think you'd have a harder time moving Blake Fisher to right tackle if he had played left tackle all year.
Sure.
That'd be a harder move. Not even harder move from convincing Blake, convincing yourself that that's not the move, right? And would Joe Alt be the lock he is right now to start at tackle?
Absolutely
Maybe not. You'd be starting at you may still make the same move you did. You may move Josh Lugg inside, but you'd be doing it with a lot more risk because you're playing a kid that never really played the year before. Because this also works the assumption if Blake doesn't get hurt, well, Josh never got hurt till the bowl game. So maybe you'd have seen Joe Alt in the bowl game at right tackle like Blake Fisher did, maybe. But I think the only difference would be they'd flip. So it would look different. It wouldn't look dramatically different, but it would look different. In my opinion.
If that injury never happens, I mean, what was Alt the fourth left tackle they went through, right? Yeah. So I mean, if he never gets hurt,
Carmody, Tosh, and then yeah.
I mean, you would assume that Tosh or Carmody would be the next guy in then in that bowl game. If I know it's all speculation, but yeah, I think you might not know who Joe. Well, I think you might be excited about Joe Alt right now for the developmental potential, but I don't think you would know Joe Alt right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we wouldn't be having the same excitement about him. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. All right. DM ND13 with a question. Who would you be more excited about landing, Jaden Ausberry or Samuel Mpemba? Not asking if you could only have one, because I want both and think we should hope for both. I like how he knows he knows my cheating answer, and so he makes sure that I don't. He gives the out so I can't cheat. Well done. Very well done. But who would you be more excited about? Ryan, I'll let you answer this one first.
It's such a tough one, man, because I think Jaden Ausberry is a better player right now, and I think he has a higher floor. But Samuel Mpemba is such a talented athlete, right? Like, I would probably say I'd be more excited about Mpemba for a couple of reasons. One, I believe in this coaching staff, so I think that they're going to get the most out of Samuel Mpemba. And if you tell me that they have Ausberry and they have Mpemba, and you're getting like the coaching staff has a good opportunity to unlock the ceiling of both players, I think Mpemba is a more impact player. That being said, I think that Ausberry has the higher floor, so I'm going to be fine with Brian when he's in a minute when he tells me it's Ausberry, because that's his favorite dude ever. So, but I think it's Mpemba for that fact. And then the other part of it is I'm a recruiting guy, right? So it's the layer of perception, and the perception of getting Samuel Mpemba will stick with more people, even if it's wrong, than Ausberry to a degree.
I think Mike, I would counter that part the most, because I do think there's also the perception of beating Brian Kelly in his backyard. I think forget the pettiness of how much I would enjoy that. Real talk, national talk, right? You just went to your former head coach's backyard and beat him for a stud top 50 kid that's literally goes to a high school that's like right there by your school. Like, that would say a lot, because Notre Dame's going to have a lot of battles with LSU now and in the future. So I think perception-wise, that would matter. I get where you're coming from with the 5-star and all that, and I completely buy that. I just think the uniqueness of, if Brian Kelly would have left for Florida instead of LSU, I'd 100% agree with you on the perception part. I just think the fact that Jaden is in Kelly's backyard and you're able to beat him for him would add something to that. I think the other part I buy, but for me, it's Ausberry, just because he's one of my favorite players in this class. I love the kid. I think he's a great Notre Dame fit. I know what position he's going to play, linebacker. I just think he's the kind of kid that comes to Notre Dame and thrives. I also think, for me, opening up Louisiana, continuing to open up Louisiana could be just as beneficial as getting more influence at IMG. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion on it as well.
Well, Charles agrees with you. He wants both.
I want both. Yeah, and I think everybody wants both. But it's like, which one? I mean, but I won't have the same excitement level for both. It's like, I'm super excited about this. I'm super excited about this, but there's a different level to my super excitement. But both of those would be home run pickups. And that's always the tough part about answering that. It's part of my reason for not liking to answer those is like, but then it comes across as like, well, you're not going to be excited about Samuel Mpemba, right? I'm be fired up about both of them. I want both of them. But just, again, it goes back to the whole style of play thing. I love linebackers like Jaden Ausberry. It's not that I dislike Samuel Mpemba. It's just I love kids. I love that 6'1", athletic, wicked smart, just makes a ton of plays kind of guy. And like he's the kind of guy that you put on, like there's a Jalen Smith type linebackers, right? Just the freaks. You're like, wow, did you see that play? Like I was watching some highlights of the 2013 game against Arizona State when Jalen was a freshman. And they ran a bubble screen, and there's like 3 guys trying to block Jalen, and he just splits them all, goes and makes a tackle for loss. Like, that dude's a freak. Then there's that kid that you look at the stat sheet, and you're like, hold on a second. I don't even remember that guy's name. He had 14 tackles. Like, I barely remember it. Just dude makes plays, and he's just a football player, and he's a leader and, setting the defense and all that kind of stuff. I love that kid. So, yeah, it's a bias. I'll flat out say it. It's a bias. There's no question. There's no question. I love these questions today, Ryan. Ladarius Martin, have you watched the USFL? Birmingham's dying 6-0. Seem any team in Alabama is good. We're a football state. I think the league is going last for real, but it has potential. I haven't watched any USFL, Ryan. I think you have, right? What are your thoughts on it so far?
There's always going to be the staying power conversation, right? Like, I think it's been entertaining. I've watched the New Jersey Guardians, I think, or Generals, are 5-1, I think, as well. So they're a decent team. It comes down to this, honestly, Ladarius. The AAF was actually doing a decent job as far as ratings, and then COVID hit, and then that just
COVID, man,
plummeted everything. I think the USFL is doing okay in that department as well. I think the interesting thing I'm going to see is when the XFL gets launched here with The Rock leading it. That's interesting. Like that, you're going to kind of be fighting on what the alternative league is, right, in the US. Because obviously outside of that, it's like you have the CFL, you have the European football leagues, like all that type of stuff. But there's always going to be people that are going to watch the football. But I think the USFL, XFL are really going to butt heads to see who has the stay power, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But the USFL has been entertaining. It's football. I'll watch it. I mean, I'm always going to watch it if it's on TV. So
I would love for another professional league to pop up, just because it's just more opportunities for kids to continue playing football. And I'm all for that. And then people who want to coach football. I'm all for markets being created that provide jobs and opportunity for people to work and do things they love and are passionate about, but also to give people joy of things that they enjoy to watch. So I'm a fan of all of those. I'm very curious what you just had that facial reaction to there in the chat.
It was just something about the AAF. I remember it folded like right because of COVID, and
there was a couple things that went on. There was there were some money issues, but then COVID hit, and it was just a combination of things. But it was doing really well TV ratings wise, and it was building a quick fan base. I enjoyed watching it. I haven't watched a single USFL game. Probably I didn't watch any XFL when it launched the first time. Probably won't watch the next time. I watched that AAF. I enjoyed it, and wish I'm not anti USFL. It hasn't thought even crossed my mind. Like XFL, I was against. I'm like the whole concept of it, the stupid how to start a game with the stupid, it was wrestling with football pads on, right? And the only wrestling I liked with football pads was the Legion of Doom. That's it, So, speaking of James Laurinaitis, but spring. I've got other things I'm worried about right now, but I would love it if there was something that was good enough to make me want to watch it. But I hope it works. I do.
The unfortunate thing is that the NFL is so unwilling to partner with a league to make a developmental league. Like that's just never gonna happen because they have college football. They don't need a developmental.
They don't need to spend the money.
Exactly.
And there's nothing college football can do to disassociate, to stop being that. Like there's nothing. Well, fine, we won't let you have our players. You have no ability to do that. There's nothing the college football can do to hurt the NFL. The NFL can do a lot of things to hurt college football, which like we've seen with the college basketball. In my opinion,
have you seen the Fan Control Football League? Such a gimmicky little thing. It's like an arena league thing. I think I don't remember if it was Manziel or if it was another quarterback, but he threw a touchdown and then lit joints like on the sideline.
Oh, I did see
recently.
that on Twitter.
Yeah. It's like they have to do gimmicky stuff like that to get any entertainment value. Yep.
A guy that I coached with at Duquesne is part of that league, and I just when I found that I was like, pass, hard pass. DMND13. This is something I get a lot, right? I get this question a lot, and you'll see it on the boards this year. It says, if you win the coin toss, would you always receive, always defer, or would it depend on the game and matchup? What would you do at Ohio State? I think for me, it depends on my team and it depends on the matchup. I am personally someone who likes the ball. I want an opportunity to beat to go up. I want to have an opportunity to go up on the scoreboard before you have an opportunity to go up on the scoreboard. That's just my stance. I think it's a personal preference thing. I've heard people say, well, teams that get the ball first usually tend to win. Is that because they got the ball first or they were the better team?
Right.
I mean, so I don't really think that has a whole lot to do with it. It's just they're the better team. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that has a whole lot more to do with it than anything else. And that's what I love when people kind of have these, they take these data points that they think back up what they already thought. And you're like, well, it's because of this. You're like, no, it's not because of that. It's because one team was really good and the other team wasn't that good. That's why that team won. Right. And so, I mean, if Bama, let's just say Bama had this phenomenal record because they got the ball first or went on defense first. Does anyone think that if all of a sudden Bama started taking the ball first, that they would all of a sudden start losing games? You know what I mean? Come on. So that's my stance on that. But I think it's a personal preference thing, but it always comes down to you also have to do what's best for your football team and what your matchup is. And I would much rather, for me, because the thought is okay, but if you go on offense first, it's going to be loud and the crowd's going to be all into it, blah, 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 blah. And I understand that. But what if the first time your offense is on the field is after you just went down 7-0? Is the crowd going to be any less loud? Or now they're going to be louder and there's even more pressure on you because you're now down 7-0.
Right.
So that's kind of that's my 2 cents on it.
I was always more of a defensive guy. So from a coaching perspective, I always wanted to defer and then play defense because I get really anxious as a coach. So I don't want to just sit there and not have any input type of thing. So, but I think it does depend.
It's the same thing.
On the
personal
matchup.
Preference. Right.
Exactly.
It's right. So I mean, look, Notre Dame started on defense against Alabama in the BCS title game. How'd that work out for them, right? Did they lose because of that, or did they lose because Bama was the better team that day? So I don't know. It's a personal preference thing for the most part. Tom Chris, 2488. I know 2015 Texas is not 2022 Ohio State, but could you see a scenario where Buckner comes out and has a game like Zaire did? That game going from unproven to stud. Thanks, guys. Keep up the good work. I could see that. I think the difference would be, I like the fact that the question was built around the offense because it won't be 38-3. It'd be more like 38-35, but the focus was on the offense. Could I see a game like that? Yeah, I could see a game like that. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to go 23-25. But as far as having a big game where he makes a lot of big plays and the offense is really rolling, yeah, I could see something like that. I'm not saying I'm predicting it, Ryan, but I wouldn't be shocked if Tyler Buckner comes out and plays well against Ohio State because A, he's really good, B, he has really good players around him, and C, I don't think much of Ohio State's defense. So yeah, I could see that.
Speaking of Brian Van Gorder, that's a game that had people fooled for a little bit.
Yeah. First one, then they had the shutout against Michigan. They beat Stanford in a low-scoring game. Of course, that quarterback eventually got beat out and wasn't very good, and that ended up not being a real good Stanford team. I still felt Van Gorder was a bum. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. That was 14. I'm thinking of. I thought he was a bum before that game, but it fed into the people that thought, oh, he's actually going to be really good because look what they did in 15. And it quickly went away. He was awful. Absolutely awful. Brandon Plesner, what player on both offense and defense can Notre Dame not afford to have a serious injury from, not including Tyler Buckner? Because obviously we talked about him last week. So if you're going to take Tyler Buckner out of the equation, who's the guy they can least afford to lose? On offense, Ryan, my 2 picks on offense would be, I'm going to go 2. One of the tackles or Lorenzo Styles. Part of me says Michael Mayer, but again, I just feel like with him, it's you can game plan not having your tight end a little bit more effectively. It's not, he's their best player. There's no question about it. It's just which guy's most replaceable. I think one of those 2 would be my pick on offense. Who would be your pick on offense?
You picked both my guys. I literally was like, Lorenzo Styles would be debilitating for the wide receiver group, and I was thinking, do I want to pick Blake Fisher or do I want to pick Joe Alt? Either way, you're in trouble if one of them gets hurt a little bit.
Yeah.
Because who's the next tackle in right now? Is it Caleb Johnson? Is it Tosh?
Yeah.
In either spot? I don't know. Yeah, it's not. That would not be a great situation to be in.
Yep, I agree. Defense for me, it's Foskey. I know you can make a case for Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph.
I'd say Cam.
But for me, it's Isaiah Foskey. Because here's why I'll say that. is if Cam goes down, Isaiah Foskey can still have an impact on keeping you from exposing whoever replaces Cam. If Foskey goes down, I don't care how good Cam is. It's going to have a big impact on the defense. That would be my 2 cents. And I would say this, if you tell me it's any game other than USC or Ohio State, I think your answer would be different. If you knew Cam was only going to be healthy for 2 games all year, and it's Ohio State, USC, you know what I mean? But if the rest of them, I think your answer might be a little bit different. But I understand it.
Mine would be
receivers this year.
They do. Mine would be Cam, just because I think it's already a position that has question marks outside of Cam. So if you got him injured now, then you're trying to find 2 corners that can do the job instead of hopefully one that can be a player out opposite of him. And Isaiah is a great player, obviously, and the separation between him and Justin Adamalola is notable, obviously. But I still have more confidence that Justin Adamalola is going to come in and give you some good production, other than one of the other corners potentially.
I think that's fair.
That's
a good point. I think that's a very fair point. Like looking at it because earlier one of the questions we had earlier, Ryan, was who's going to be the biggest surprise this year, and it was Justin Adamalola was mine. I think people are underestimating. That's a really good point. It's not. I think we both agree that Isaiah Foskey's their best defensive player. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
So your point is the same. It's like, but I feel better about who replaces Isaiah compared to Cam. That's a really good point.
Absolutely.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's really, really good point. I'm gonna have to go with you on that one. That makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna go with you on that one. I'm gonna change my answer. Ryan has convinced me. Get used to it, people. Don't get used to it, people. Doesn't happen often. But Ryan has put forth counselor.
All I heard was get used to it, people. That's all I heard.
No, don't get used to it, people. Katie Keevers, if Tyler Buckner, we haven't seen you in a while, Katie, so glad to have you back in the channel. If Tyler Buckner does not take the step forward we all are hoping for, how much should the blame be placed on Reese, or does it just reflect upon Buckner? I think it's both. I think it's always both.
It's always both. Yeah.
But
I mean, it's like one of the things, it's either you're fully on one side or you're fully on the other. It's usually a combination of things, right? Like it's not usually one thing. The perception is going to be on Reese, in my opinion, at least in the channel, because people are, the development of quarterbacks has not been great, even though it's not just a Tommy Reese thing, but they want to see it happen, obviously, right? So I think that they're going to say, Buckner was a 5-star. How did he not get the best out of him? Like, I think that's going to be the perception, even if it's not the reality.
Yep. Agree. I think it would really hurt Tommy Reese's reputation more than it hurt Tyler Buckner's. I will say that. If you look at it from a different way. So like you're talking about blame, Katie. I think the blame would likely go more on Tommy Reese because it would continue a trend of, talented quarterbacks that didn't pan out at Notre Dame. Now, it would hurt Tyler Buckner perception-wise, but it would hurt Tommy Reese big time. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think it would just be like, well, here we go again, right? Notre Dame can't develop quarterbacks. And I think there's also a lot of people that still are doubting Coach Reese. There's a lot of doubters about Coach Reese, and I think that would only feed into that. So I think it would hurt him more. But as far as if we're going to have an objective who's to blame, I think it's both. Because as a coach, you can only, you can't play for him. You can only tell him what, teach him as best you can. You can't play for him. So if you're truly doing your job, there comes a point in time where a guy's got to go out and make plays or not. And that's the reason.
I had that conversation last night with a buddy. I was just saying how it's really frustrating sometimes from a coaching perspective when you put a player in a good position, they miss a tackle, and then the parents are just like, "What are you doing, coach?" Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I can't make the tackle for him,
Mm-hmm.
Like I can only put them in position to make a play.
It's your fault. You guys gave him bad genes. That's your fault.
I should say
his DNA is poor and he's unathletic because of you. You made him that way. So look in the mirror.
He has no length.
Yeah, I've said that to many parents during my coaching years in my head. Never out loud. I never quite had the guts to say it to them personally, but I've said it in my head. Why isn't my kid playing? Because your kid sucks because you gave him bad DNA. I didn't say it. Thought it, didn't say it. All right, DMND13. How would you rank these coaches from best to worst? James Franklin, Matt Campbell, Pat Narduzzi, PJ Fleck, and Pat Fitzgerald. Ooh, that's a list of guys I don't really care to think.
I like I personally like Pat Fitzgerald. I do like Pat Fitzgerald. I would between him and Matt Campbell would be the top for me. I'm gonna say Fitzgerald just because of my bias for a second, and then I would say Matt Campbell. After that, I would say Narduzzi.
Look, I get your love for Fitzgerald. I mean, it's hard to go 3-9 in the last 2 years. You know, in two of the last 3 years.
It's hard to win at Northwestern, my friend.
He's doing the same thing that Randy Walker did, and all. I mean, come on, man. Gary Barnett took him to a Rose Bowl. They've gone I think there was a time when that argument made sense, but the last 3 years they've gone 3-9 in 2 of the last 3 years. I think the shine has to be off at least a little bit because of that. And
I like Pat Fitz, man. Pat Fitz,
he hates
Matt Campbell. That's fine. I mean, he's not coaching there, so it's fine.
Narduzzi, but he is better than Pat Narduzzi. I will say that.
Yes, Narduzzi, Fleck, and Franklin, in my opinion.
You go Franklin last.
I don't get the James Franklin.
You think he's you think Pat Narduzzi is a better coach than James Franklin? Really?
Yes, I do. Maybe not a better recruiter, but I do.
See, that's part of being a coach, though.
Sure, but
it's the talent acquisition.
I also think that James Franklin wastes a lot of talent. Like I just don't. Yeah, I just don't get it with him. I don't.
True.
I never got it with him.
He's also had a rough couple years. I mean, it's this kind of similar argument to what I made about Pat Fitzgerald. Is like, I mean, they're 11-11 in the last 2 years, and it's with a lot of. And I said this on. Remember, I tweeted this during the draft. They kept having these first, second, third round picks. I'm like, does anybody waste more talent than Penn State does? And they have these like they had a kid who didn't even play at Penn State that ran like a 4.22 to combine. It was absurd. It was just stupid. Or pro day, excuse me, the pro day. But they always have these freaky athletes, you know, and it's like guys, these combine warriors, and it's like, and you're like these highly top 10 to 12 recruiting classes, and you're like, you're going 11-11 last 3 years. Like, you know, what's going on? But I still think because of the recruiting, I think I'd put him number 2. But I'd go Campbell 1. I'd probably go Franklin 2 just because of the recruiting, but I'd feel real dirty about putting him there because I don't think he's a very good coach. I think he's a good motivator and a good recruiter. I think he's the worst game day coach on this list. But here's the other thing. Of the 5 guys on this list, he's going to have the best players every time, which partly is because he's a Penn State, not Pitt or Iowa State or Minnesota or whatever. But the guy won 9 games twice at Vanderbilt. Like, sometimes I wonder if maybe he'd be better at a place like that than he is at a place like Penn State. PJ Fleck would be my 3rd. I'd go Fitzgerald next, and I'd go Pat Narduzzi last. I think Pat
you hate Narduzzi, man.
I just dislike him as a coach. I think this year was the fluke year. I think he's more of the guy that went 7-7, you know, and goes 8-5. I think he's not a great in-game coach. I think they had a great quarterback, and the fact that Mark Whipple sprinted to Nebraska to get away from Narduzzi at Pitt says everything you need to know about what it's like working for Pat Narduzzi. I also have a friend of mine whose kid played there. And
wait, did I have stories? I think I may have actually put Narduzzi in front of Fleck, and I would like to reverse that if I did say that. I would put Fleck at 3 and Narduzzi at 4 if I said that. My mistake.
I think PJ Fleck's a better coach than James Franklin, not by a ton, but he's a better coach than James Franklin. But I think Franklin's a better recruiter, and that's where he got the edge for me, to be honest with you.
That's fair. I mean, but look. I mean, to your point about Franklin at Vanderbilt, right? I know Vanderbilt's obviously in the SEC, so it's a little different than winning at Western Michigan. But taking that program to 12-0 or whatever the heck they were with Fleck was pretty impressive in a 3-year span or whatever it was. So
4-year,
4-year span,
and a bunch of 5 actually. Well, I think he was there for 5 years.
I just remember wasn't his first year like 1-11 or
1-11. Then they had a couple 8-5 years.
Yeah.
And was he there 4 years? Yeah, 4 years. He went 1-11, 8-5, 8-5, and then 13-1. And that 13-1 season, I mean, they beat Northwestern on the road. So your boy Narduzzi beat Illinois on the road by 24, and then of course lost to Wisconsin. And the game they lost to Wisconsin, the Cotton Bowl, that was a competitive game. I mean, they got blown out by Wisconsin.
You just had to row the boat, man.
Right. He's had 2 good years and then a bunch of you know.
Yeah, I know.
And that's kind of my thing. But I could see him easily sliding up to number 2. But Matt Campbell's not the lock for number 1 for me that he would have been a year ago. A year ago, he'd have been a no-brainer number 1 for me. But what I said last offseason, Ryan, was this is the year we really get to see what Matt Campbell's made of, because this is the first year that there's actually pressure and expectations on his program. And they failed miserably, in my opinion, miserably. Jimmy McGill asks, what are the top 10 coaching jobs in college based on following? And we'll get into those different things. Jimmy, so this is the second time you've done this in the last couple weeks. Jimmy is a new listener. You have given me a question that I'm not going to answer right now because I'm writing it down as a show idea for the summer. I think it'd be a great show idea. I don't think we can do justice to that top 10 without a full show, Ryan. So, Jimmy, I just wrote this down, literally wrote it down, top 10 programs based on all the different factors that we'll get into. So I love the idea, Jimmy. So we're not going to answer it now, but I did want to pull it up to give you props for when we do that show this summer that we'll give you, I may think about giving you credit for it. We'll see what kind of mood I'm in at the time, but we shall see. P-Dub says, what's the one thing that will shock you both positively and negatively about the team? Talking about Notre Dame. Well, I don't know. I mean, if I knew what they were, they wouldn't shock me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll say this. The one thing that would shock me if it happened, I'll say that. How about that? The one thing that would shock me both positively and negatively, if the line play is not good, I'll be shocked. The thing that would shock, what's thoughts, Ryan?
I was just going to say negatively, kind of on the same wavelength, is that the running back room isn't strong. I just feel like that's such a no-brainer for me right now, is that they're going to be really dynamic in that group. So kind of in a similar wavelength, just different position.
Yep. The thing that would shock me positively is that the secondary becomes the strength of the defense. I don't think it'll happen. I could see a path for it, though. But it would shock me if it happened. Right?
That's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah. Because it'd be like, okay, Ryan Barnes breaks out, which then puts Clarence Lewis in more of a rotation role, which is where I think he's better suited. Tariq has a great year in the slot. Cam Hart makes the first-round leap that we think he's capable of. Brandon Joseph is what you have always thought he is going to be. And somebody breaks out at the other safety position. I mean, are any of those things necessarily far-fetched? No. But for all those things to happen would take literally just the inside straight. We don't ever really see that, in my opinion. So if that were to happen and all of a sudden the safety position or the secondary becomes the strength of the defense, that would shock me positively. I think it could be good, but that's why I say the strength, not a strength, but the strength of the defense. I think it would be a positive shock for me. Can you think of anything else that would be a positive shock?
Positive shock if there are 2,000-yard receivers on the team this year.
Yeah.
Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Styles, let's say.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last time that's happened? 2,000-yard receivers on the same team? That's a good question.
It's been I think you'd have to go back to Stovall and Samardzija in 05. Yeah. I don't think it's
because remember Rima the next year, wasn't it?
No, he never got to 1,000.
Oh, he didn't?
He had like 900 something. He had like 15 touchdowns or something like that. But yeah, Raymond McKnight, he never had. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to look it up now, but he didn't have 1,000 yards that year. I'm pretty sure. Now, if he would have not dropped 18 passes against USC in the last game of the year, he might have got to 1,000. He had 907, 67 catches for 907 yards, 15 touchdowns. Now, Floyd and Golden Tate would have if Floyd didn't keep getting hurt. In 2009, especially, I mean, Golden won the Biletnikoff that year. He had over 1,400 yards. Until the moment Floyd got hurt against Michigan State, he was their best receiver and their leading receiver. I mean, he was having a monster year. They both would have gone for 1,000 yards. I have no doubt about that. I don't think – because Will Fuller, there was nobody else that had 1,000 with Will. Eifert never had 1,000 with Floyd.
EQ was only 9-something, right? EQ was only 9-something.
EQ, yeah, he never went over 1,000, and he led the team. TJ Jones had over 1,000, but nobody else did. Nobody had 1,000 with Will Fuller. Nobody had 1,000 with Chase in 19, and then Notre Dame hasn't had 1,000-yard receiver the last 2 years. So, yeah, I think that would be a real positive shock. It's a good one, Ryan. Real good one. You're on fire today. You got a little salty with the microphone thing. You came back like locked in. I'm
locked in without a hat, man. No hats.
I'm digging it. See, it's like your brain has just got all this room to breathe now. So
yeah, it was tight.
There you
It
go.
was tight.
Speaking of Buckner, I feel it from Jacob Watson. Speaking of Buckner, I feel a ton of fans and people around the country are sleeping on him based on some of his games passing last year. What are your thoughts? I think he's a difference maker. I agree with you, Jacob. I do. Ryan, what are your thoughts? I do think he's being overlooked. I understand nationally. I think he's being overlooked by a lot of Notre Dame fans. I do.
I think there's a misconception about the passing prowess just because he had such a simplistic playbook when he would come into the football game. Like it was, I mean, he was a gadget player last year. Like let's call him what it actually was, right? Like he's basically a wildcat quarterback. I mean, so yeah, I think that we are seriously underrating the talent. I mean, go back and watch him coming out of California. I mean, he had some incredible passing numbers and he has incredible passing upside. It's just people have a recency bias and they saw last year him in a very dumbed down role. And that did not allow him to take advantage of his skill set. So we'll see this year. That's where he's going to be judged upon this year, not last year.
And here's another part of that recency bias. If they would have put Jack Cohn back in the game of the second half against Virginia Tech, I believe we would have a completely different opinion of Tyler Buckner right now. Completely different opinion. I think he'd be less prepared because I think he needed that second half against Virginia Tech. But I think he would be better. I think if he would have just gone 8 of 14 for 100 some yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half and brought them back, and then they put Jack Cohn back in, I think people have a different opinion of him because a lot of the critics of Tyler ignore the first half and focus on the second half, which some fairness to it, but I think that's where a lot of people seem to be, in my opinion, missing the boat a little bit when it comes to his talent and effectiveness, in my opinion. So that's my 2 cents. Jimmy McGill, what makes the biggest difference in passing game this year? Better wide receiver coaching under Chancey Stuckey, Tommy Rees being unleashed to call what he wants, or Tyler Buckner being better than Cohn as a passer?
The biggest difference?
We can't cheat and take I'm going to go away from what my gut is and to cheat and say all of it together because I think ultimately that's the answer, right? It's all of it together.
Sure.
But if you could say which one of so all of them have to work together, right, Ryan? I mean, Chancey has to do better, Tommy this, and then Buckner, right? And I would even throw in there O-line improves in pass protection, right? So I think we need to have that as part of this conversation too because that's what we saw last year is they couldn't protect Jack Cohn. Tommy's calling plays where guys are getting open, but you can't protect the quarterback. So I think you throw that in there too. I think they all have to go together. But if there's one thing that is going to be better on the other, it's the trigger man. I'm always going to go to that. It's always going to be is the dude at quarterback making the plays with his mind and arm that need to be made. Because if Chancey's doing a great job coaching and Tommy's unleashing great play calls and the O-line's giving him pass pro, but Tyler Buckner's not reading the defense, not throwing on time and not being accurate, then it doesn't matter. It's my Ian Book argument, right? It doesn't matter. All these things don't matter. If the quarterback's unwilling to throw the ball, it doesn't matter. If he throws it, but it's inaccurate, it doesn't matter. All those other things don't matter. That's the one thing that didn't get – because here's my point. If Tommy's calling great games and the pass pro is good and Buckner's money, then the receivers don't have to be elite coached. Just have to be okay. If the receivers are coached and Tommy's calling great games and Buckner's money and the O-line's not as good, there's things you can do to protect against it. Move the pocket, throw quick game screens. There's things that you can do, right? And I would go all over. The one thing that can negate all of them is pass pro to a degree, but more so it's if the quarterback's not playing well. That's the one kryptonite to all those other things. And so that's, to me, the quarterback doing what he needs to do and playing well is ultimately the thing that we'll have of those. All those things are important, but I think the trigger man is always going to be the most important.
I am going to cheat slightly, not fully.
Okay.
I was gonna say yes to begin with, but I would say coaching is what I'm going to defer to here because 2 out of 3 of these things have to do directly with a coaching wrinkle that is being thrown in. We saw what the offense can look like differently from a passing perspective when Tommy Rees was unleashed in the bowl game. We saw evidence that it can happen, and we have I think confidence that Chancey Stuckey is going to get a lot more out of the wide receiver group. I think that's pretty safe to say. So I'm going to say coaching unlocks it the most because I just believe in Tyler Buckner. Like I I think the coaching staff, whether it's in the recruiting side of things, team building side of things, in the coaching side of things, I think highly of their abilities. So I'm going to say that coaching takes it to the next level.
I don't disagree with your point, but I'll still say if the coaching is good, but the trigger man's not getting the job done, that has a bigger impact than it's like you and I both know that a dynamic quarterback can overcome bad coaching much more than good coaching can overcome a bad quarterback. That's kind of what I get down
That's
to.
fair.
But
That's fair.
It's all important. None of those can be bad. That's the thing I think we'll say. None of those things can be bad. That's the key. Michael Rice asks, if Tyler stays healthy, what would be your projected stat line for him, for Tyler Buckner? Secondary, how about Brandon Joseph on the other side of the ball? I think I've been asked this before about Tyler Buckner, and you know, I don't remember what my answer was last time. If he stays healthy, I think I'm around like a 3,000 passing yards. You know, I think I said 2,800 last time. If he's healthy, I think about 3,000 is probably a more realistic number, including the postseason. And I'd say 500 plus rushing yards. I think I'm looking at like 35 to 3,700 total yards, and it can be a sliding scale. So if he rushes for 700, maybe only throws for 28, right? Something like that, you know, that kind of thing. If it's like 3,500's the number, you know, you know what I mean? If he only runs for 300 and he's healthy all year and starts all the games, it means he threw for a bunch and he's just not running. But I'd be more shocked if we see a lower rushing number than a lower passing number. Just because I think this run game, to your point earlier, Ryan, you talked about the backs and the offensive line, and I think there's a lot of teams that are going to just blow out this year. There's some bad teams in the schedule. I mean, Notre Dame's schedule right now, if you look at all 12 opponents, has a combined losing record from last year, despite you have 11-2 Ohio State, 10-3 BYU, 10-3 Clemson. You still have a losing combined record because there's some bad teams in this. UNLV sucks. Navy sucks. Syracuse is not good. Cal's not good. Marshall, compared to Notre Dame, is not good. Stanford's not good. I mean, there's just not a lot of – there's like a group of 5 that I think could be good, and then there's just a lot of not very good at all. So I think there could be games where he doesn't throw for a ton of yards because they just run all over people. But I think like 35 to 3,700 is my total offensive range for him, Ryan. What would your stat line be for that?
Mine would be about 3,500 total, maybe 3,600 total. So I'm thinking somewhere 28 to 2,900 yards passing and another 700 rushing. And I think around 35 total touchdowns, I think is kind of fair. Like I would say 35-ish total touchdowns.
Like 27 rushing, 8 or 27 passing, 8 rushing, 25 passing, 10 rushing, which is very similar to a Deshaun Kaiser stat line from 2015.
You almost made him Ricky Dobbs there for a second.
I know, right?
Man.
Seriously.
Or Keenan Reynolds.
I know, right? Yeah. Seriously, turned him into a triple option quarterback at Navy. It's like, all right, Eric Crouch. Okay. Michael Rice also said, would you mind sharing who you would like to see as the next offensive coordinator should Tommy leave, and maybe who you think a few of the up-and-coming offensive minds at smaller schools? Unfortunately, Michael, a lot of the names that I liked are gone to the NFL now. I really liked the kid at Kentucky because I'm not a big Will Levis fan. And I think that he was made – it kind of goes back to, Ryan, how you answered the previous question. I think the coaching made him look a lot better than he is. And you know, I think that he was a guy that what's his name? I forget. It's like, is it Levi or something like that? What's the guy's name? He's with the Rams now.
He's the new offense coordinator, right?
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I'd have to study the game. Like, I liked Kalen DeBoer a lot as an offensive coordinator. Yep. Now he's the head coach at Washington. He's off the table.
Liam Cohen.
Cohen. Okay.
Yep.
So he's a guy that I liked, but I mean, he's not leaving the Rams to take an OC job at Notre Dame if Tommy Rees left, you know? So sure. I'm going to have to kind of reorient myself a little bit, Michael, and just really study some of the names out there, you know, and just kind of see who is out there. What I can say, the reason I pulled your question up is even though I don't have a name for you, I do think it's very important that Coach Freeman hires someone that has the ability or the potential to create a dynamic offense. Because the one thing I do believe is I don't think Notre Dame's going to be able to compete for titles playing in a conservative offense. Now, not being conservative doesn't equal rushing, and not being conservative doesn't equal not running. I think you can run the football a lot and be effective, still have an explosive offense. I point to Oklahoma. I point to some of Lane Kiffin's best teams. When Oklahoma had their best offenses, they ran a lot. When Ohio State's had their best offenses, they've run a lot. I think you can run a lot and still be in a dynamic, explosive offense, but you got to be able to throw the football as well. And so he's got to find someone that comes with that thought process. And I'd rather not have someone that's going to completely overhaul the philosophy. Like, don't go from a pro style spread to an air raid, a Mike Leach air raid. You know what I mean? Like, would I be okay kind of going to like a Phil Longo, Jeff Lebby version of the air raid? Sure. Do I want a Mike Leach disciple air raid? No, that's not what I would want. Like I'm not hiring Graham Harrell, for example, right? Like, he's not on my list. That would be the key. You guys got a tornado watch out there in New Jersey?
That was some type of warning, man, that just popped up. Yeesh, that was loud.
Ryan just kind of goes flying up like this. We know what's going on, everybody. So get to that. Gonna kind of get to a few more questions here because we do have.
Wait, can I throw one guy in real quick?
Sure,
Brian?
of course.
Real quick. Yeah. I wanted to just throw out a guy named Eric Morris, who is actually going to be the offensive coordinator at Washington State this year. He was the head coach of Incarnate Word in Texas over the last couple of years. He averaged like over 40 points per game the last 2 years at Incarnate Word. He's actually bringing his quarterback Cam Ward over with him. He was a really talented player, by the way. So I think that he's a guy to watch at Washington State. He's going to be the offensive coordinator this year. Eric Morris.
This will be his first year. Looks like he played at Texas Tech as a wide receiver. So
but
he plays in the air raid that I just said I don't.
Well, no, but if you watch it though, man, it's much more Phil Longo air raid because they actually had a running back that ran for like over 1,000 yards. They're more a pro style air raid than Mike Leach air raid. So
look. Lincoln Riley's a Mike Leach disciple. They run the ball a lot more. At least they did early on in his tenure at Oklahoma. I'm very curious what his heart is in that. I wonder if some of that was like, did he do it because that's what Bob Stoops wanted and then Bill Bedenbaugh, or is that where he wanted to be? But I don't mind an air raid if it's one that's built around being able to go out there and be balanced. You have to be balanced. That's the key. And I'm not like, you got to run for X number of yards. It's just, you got to be balanced. I'm trying to look up Incarnate Words. They were in the Southland. Were they in the Southland last year? Ryan's had to get out of here. So, see, bringing up a guy. I'm doing my research, and then he had to take off. So, let's get to these next couple questions here real quick. Michael Campbell, what date before week 1 should we as a fan base expect to have an offensive identity, to have real insight on what we are good at? The players by name who are playmakers to depend on. I don't know if we really are going to have an answer to that until we see them play games. I think for me, it would be, you want to have an idea of, Michael, of who your starters are and who your top players are and kind of what your focus is going to be, really kind of getting into that, the 2 weeks out from the opener kind of thing. So like a week out from, you get your first games on September 3rd, that Monday before you're going to start your sort of in-season routine. You want to have a week under your belt before that, where your football team kind of has an idea of who you want to be and what you're trying to do, and those type of things is really what, in a perfect world, that's the cutoff that you start to feel like, okay, this is who we're going to be as a football team. I think that's kind of where I get them. And let's see here. All right, Antoine Porsche-Rideau. Do you think Notre Dame will sign 4 from Texas? Rivals said fiction and that Bowen would flip to Texas A&M. I don't think you should listen to what Rivals says about anything, to be honest with you. Obviously, Braylon James they have. I think Peyton Bowen that they have. I think Jaden Greathouse, I think they're in a great position for with him. Then it comes down to, can they get Micah Bell? And so I think right now, do I think Notre Dame will sign? Let me see how the visit with Micah Bell goes first, but I think they got a shot. I think they got a good shot. And, I think Notre Dame's in a good place with Micah Bell. I think from everything we've heard, he likes Notre Dame a lot, but that visit's going to have a big, big say in kind of how that plays out. I wanted to pull this up. Irish for Life put this in here, and he's a good, loyal member of our community. He has been really with Irish Breakdown from the beginning. He's been on part of the channel. He was one of the original people that got on the free message board that was part of the original Irish Maven site. He's been around for a while, and he's been dealing with a lot of health issues over the years, and he asked that we pray for him. He has a new health issue, and he says one of the potentials is that it could be cancer, and he has an appointment that's over a month away. So I know he's had to battle through a lot of pain and a lot of sickness, and my friend, you are certainly in our prayers. So we will definitely be thinking about you, not just because that's what we do, but also, I mean, I'm not going to lie, you're one of the OGs of the Irish Breakdown site and the message board and the chat and all that kind of stuff. So we certainly wish you all the best and good health. So we'll definitely be praying for you, my friend. And I know there's a lot of people on this chat that will be doing the same. Absolutely. And then, as May say, Case and Ryan, it's simple. Join the message board, people. If you're watching, you can see the link down there, boards@irishbreakdown.com. It's $4.99 a month. That is not a trial offer. That is not a do that for the first year, the first 3 months, and then after that it goes up. That's what we do. Or it's $49.99 for a year. A lot of people have asked, hey, I want to support the channel. I'm not a message board person. You can still sign up. You don't have to, we're not going to force you to, you don't have to, there's not like a 20 post minimum, right? I mean, you don't have to do that. We also have a booster club, an Irish Breakdown booster club. So if you go to boards@irishbreakdown.com, you'll see that there's a Shamrock club, a blue club, and a gold club, which are ways that you can support our channel and support us as an institution and help us continue to grow. Hit that like button, smash the like button, actually, is what May says. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the podcast, and leave a 5-star review. And as always, go Irish. Sean and I will be back tomorrow with a show, probably around 1:00 p.m. So we'll have a show tomorrow. Don't have our schedule for the rest of the weekend figured out. Monday's Memorial Day. Tuesday, I have jury duty. So there's a lot of things up in the air. But that's why you need to be subscribed to our channel so you know, or notifications so you know. Also, we'll talk about on the message board, and I'll tweet it out too once we finalize everything. So really appreciate all of your patience with us. Great questions today. There's a ton of great questions that we couldn't get to just because we're at that 3-hour mark and I'm losing my voice, and we just need to get rocking and rolling because there's a couple of things we got to get done today. But we'll be back tomorrow. Sean and I will answer questions. So if you had a question that we didn't get to today and you're going to be with us tomorrow, bring it up again and we'll answer it, and we'll try to get to it after Sean and I talk tomorrow. So I think it'll be really, really good. So I apologize for not getting all the questions, but you guys had so many great questions that, I mean, we just weren't going to get to all of them. I'm still at like barely 2:30 right now as far as the times where we are in questions, and we're like still an hour behind. So I apologize, but tons of great questions, tons of great discussion. For Ryan, Vince, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day. If we don't, for some reason, talk to you, whether we end up not being able to do a show or you're not able to do the show because you're traveling, happy Memorial Day. Thank you again to all those who have served our country. And obviously Memorial Day is a day that we remember those who lost their lives serving for our country, and that sacrificed their lives so that we can be a free country. And as of today, we still are a free country because of their sacrifice. And so we honor all of them, including those who didn't necessarily die fighting, but have gone since. I always think of my grandfather who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, fought in World War II. I always think of him and what his generation had to sacrifice so that we can be here today and be doing silly things like talking football. So it's much appreciated, and we have a great deal of respect for all of you. So have a wonderful Memorial Day, and we will see you all again very soon. Thank you for joining the Irish Breakdown podcast.